Chapter 599. Li Jiandong hadn't expected that Zhang Kongyun, who was as thin as firewood, would have the power of a monster. He only felt as if he was being pinched in the palm of a giant, and a huge force was pulling him up from the bottom up. Li Yunyang was shocked. He immediately sank his qi into his dantian, and all the jinqi in his body burst out in an instant. All the hair on his body stood up with a swish, and a faint golden shell quickly appeared on his body. However, it was broad daylight now, and under the sunlight, this faint golden light was almost invisible. Watch net. 7kom.com. Li Yundong's breath sank, and his whole body pressed down like a huge rock weighing 10,000 kilograms. A martial arts practitioner who often practiced the lower body was often unable to move even 10 oxen. However, the strength of a cultivator far exceeded that of an ordinary martial arts practitioner, especially Li Yundong's qi, which was vigorous and condensed. This sinking was like a sea-stabilizing needle, firmly rooted to the ground. Zhang Kongyun just wanted to throw Li Yundong up and make him look bad, but he didn't expect that Li Yundong would be so difficult to deal with. He didn't even throw him. The young boy in front of him was as motionless as Mount Tai. A sharp light flashed in Zhang Kongyun's eyes. He was not convinced, so he stimulated his true essence again. His bones crackled like fried beans, and his skinny body swelled up little by little. His thin muscles slowly swelled up, and the dried blood vessels under his skin bulged up like balloons. They were like small snakes twisting crazily. Li Yunyang knew that there were many elderly cultivators in Taoism who, in order to fight against the laws of nature, tried their best to ensure that their bodies would not be consumed. They would choose to keep the most essential parts of their bodies, essence, qi, and blood. These three parts were all hidden in the 2 kidneys, 2 livers, and 2 hearts of the human body. If they could save more blood, they would save more. As a result, even though they all looked like old people, once the essence and blood stored in their kidneys, livers, and hearts suddenly burst out, their bodies would also go through a huge change. It was like a withered tree that had been given a new lease of life, and they would regain their youthful vigor. At this time, Zhang Kongyun's muscles swelled, and his body became bigger. Li Yunyang's heart immediately trembled. He knew that the other party was going to use all his strength. Zhang Kongyun took a deep breath and pressed his thumb against Li Yundong's huku acupoint. With this press, Li Yundong suddenly had an illusion. It was as if under the pressure of the other person's finger, his whole body seemed to be shorter, and his feet involuntarily went soft, making him want to fall. Even if it was a ferocious tiger or a giant elephant, he could press them to the ground with a single press of his finger. Jinshin real essence was originally condensed and vigorous, firm and powerful. The spirit virtual realm was only at the primary level of Jinshin, but with the indestructible Jinshin, he was almost immune to all magic arts and magic treasures. It could be seen how terrifying the real essence density of Jinshin protection was. But Zhang Kongyun compressed such a powerful and dense jinqi into the size of a thumb. What did this mean? Amazing. Li Yundong was shocked. Zhang Kongyun had condensed all the jinqi in his body into one point in an instant, and all of it was gathered on his thumb. At this time, not to mention pressing the huku acupoint, even if it was pressed on a steel plate, it could make a hole like pressing cheese. This press not only had the subtlety of martial arts moves, but also the horror of cultivation power. If Li Yundong was pressed by Zhang Kongyun, not to mention that he had not compressed Jinshin jinqi into a little bit, even if he used the power of ordinary Jinshin to pinch Li Yundong a little harder, Li Yundong would not be able to bear it. The huku acupoint was also known as the higu acupoint, and the higu, as the name suggested, was the higu. It was also called the higu acupoint. The gap between the 2 mountains was also called the higu. The meaning of the higu was that the qi and blood of the large intestine gathered here. This acupoint belonged to the spleen and stomach, and the spleen was a hematopoietic organ. Once the huku acupoint was pinched, with Zhang Kongyun's powerful jinqi, he could instantly control the qi and blood of Li Yundong's whole body, and even block the temporary hematopoiesis of his spleen. Cultivators often cultivated their internal organs, so their 5 viscera and 6 bowels were incredibly powerful. In the past, when Li Yundong had a drinking competition with Zhao Yuzhen, he had swallowed several bottles of white wine in one breath. He had relied on his strong liver function to detoxify and detoxify. In the Desanxian, he had used the magic skill of the divine dragon absorbing water, relying on his strong lung function. Most of the time, Li Yundong could burst out with monstrous power in an instant. That was because his liver function could store far more blood than ordinary people, and his spleen could produce dozens of times more blood than ordinary people in an instant. The power of a cultivator's jinqi came from the flow of qi and blood. The explosive power almost completely depended on the flow speed and capacity of qi and blood. But if the flow and production of qi and blood were controlled by someone, it was equivalent to being pinched by someone at the source. No matter how powerful Li Yundong was, he would be captured. What's more, Zhang Kongyun's press also contained the terrifying power of Jinshin. This ordinary press immediately made Li Yundong feel Zhang Kongyun's powerful and exquisite fighting strength. His moves were not necessarily extraordinary, but they were aimed at the vital points, and the pressure was so strong that it was suffocating. This Zhang Kongyun is at least in the intermediate phase of the Jinshin, the immortal Jinshin. Li Yundong immediately became respectful. He didn't dare to be careless. With a flip of his wrist, he straightened his index finger and poked at Zhang Kongyun's palm. But the two of them moved extremely fast. It looked like Li Yundong had raised a finger, waiting for Zhang Kongyun to hit it like a nail. Although Li Yundong couldn't condense all the Jinshin jinqi in his body into a place as small as a thumb like Zhang Kongyun, his jinqi had been cultivated hard in Tibet. It was much thicker and more condensed than that of ordinary cultivators. At this time, he was in the Jinshin phase, so his power could not be underestimated. In particular, the position of Li Yundong's finger was precisely the Laogong acupoint on Zhang Kongyun's palm. The Laogong acupoint was also known as the Ghost Road acupoint. In traditional Chinese medicine, ghost was opposite to heaven and referred to the earth. Road referred to the meaning of the road. The ghost road meant that the qi and blood in the acupoint came from the earth, corresponding to the Yongquan acupoint. In traditional Chinese medicine, there was often a healthcare method of rubbing the Laogong acupoint and then pressing the Yongquan acupoint. It meant to connect the qi of the earth together and achieve the goal of promoting the human body's qi and blood to flow more smoothly. The Laogong acupoint, like the Huku acupoint, belonged to the spleen. Moreover, it belonged to the Jian pericardium meridian of hand. The flow of the human body's qi and blood often passed through here. When many people were nervous, their palms would sweat. The place where they sweated was the ghost road, which was the Laogong acupoint. If Li Yundong's poke hit, not only would Zhang Kongyun not be able to press Li Yundong's Huku acupoint, but his own qi and blood would have a big problem. Although he had a Jinshin to protect himself, Li Yundong also had a Jinshin. Although it was only at the primary level, as long as he hit the right place, he could break the surface with the point. It was very common for a primary Jinshin to break the protection of an advanced Jinshin. Zhang Kongyun saw that Li Yundong's reaction was astonishingly fast. In the blink of an eye, he not only dodged his attack, but also immediately gave him a taste of his own medicine. In turn, he immediately hit him with a point to break the surface. Zhang Kongyun secretly admired him and thought, "You really deserve your reputation." His nickname, Invincible Li, wasn't just for show. But, if you think that's all I have, then you're wrong. Zhang Kongyun thought quickly. He turned his wrist and grabbed Li Yundong's wrist. Taking advantage of the movement of Li Yundong's wrist, he sent out another fierce force and pulled him up. Li Yundong had put all his strength into dealing with Zhang Kongyun's move. He couldn't help but feel a little weak under his feet, and his foundation was not as solid as before. At this time, when he was suddenly pulled by Zhang Kongyun, his feet immediately loosened and he was about to fly up again. Li Yundong immediately made a handprint with his other hand and quickly shouted a mantra in a low voice. A big handprint slapped toward Zhang Kongyun's face. Zhang Kongyun saw a golden palm in front of him in the blink of an eye. He was shocked and did not dare to dodge. He was afraid that if he dodged, Li Yundong's palm would hit the building behind him. That would make a big noise. Zhang Kongyun immediately retreated quickly. He flicked the sleeve of his Taoist robe and put the big handprint into his sleeve. Li Yundong's tyrannical big handprint suddenly sank into the sea like a clay ox, and there was no more movement. The continuous fight between Zhang Kongyun and Li Yundong only lasted for 2 or 3 seconds. Before the surrounding tourists could react and look at the two of them had already separated as if nothing had happened. Because the movements of the two of them were relatively subtle, the surrounding tourists did not notice that the two of them had been fighting back and forth for several rounds. Zhang Kongyun looked at Li Yundong with slight anger in his eyes and said in a deep voice, "Jinrenli, it's not easy for you to have such a cultivation at such a young age. You should respect yourself." Li Yundong saw that the tourists around had noticed him and Zhang Kongyun at this time. He didn't want to entangle with Zhang Kongyun anymore, so he said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, "Thank you for your guidance, senior, but I'm free to do whatever I want, and I don't need you to teach me. This time, I came here to plead for Zi Yuan. I hope you won't target her in the future. If there's anything, just come to me. If your leader really hasn't come out of seclusion, when he does, please convey my meaning to him." Zhang Kongyun's eyes narrowed slightly. He had just tested Li Yundong's strength. If the two of them really fought, they would definitely not be able to tell the outcome without fighting fiercely. In the current situation, it was better not to entangle with them anymore. Otherwise, both of them would lose. Zhang Kongyun nodded slightly. He glanced at Su Chan coldly and shouted in a low voice, "There is still more than a month before the inauguration ceremony of the leader of the Linggong sect. I'm looking forward to fighting with you. However, Jinrenli, don't think that you are a Jinshin master just because you have cultivated to the Jinshin phase. When the inauguration ceremony comes, I will tell you what a real Jinshin fight is. Finally, I give you a piece of advice. Don't associate with this kind of witch. Otherwise, you will regret it." "Humph." Li Yundong smiled faintly. He took Su Chan's hand and said, "The one thing I don't regret in my life is falling in love with her." With that, he stopped talking. He turned around and took Su Chan's hand and walked down the mountain. At this time, Zhang Kongyun's eyes flashed as he stared at Su Chan's figure for a long time. Then he turned around and left. Regardless of the other Taoist priest's greetings, he quickly walked to the backyard of the mansion. When he arrived at a place where there was no one, he used his kung fu and quickly ran to a peak of Mount Longhu. When he ran all the way to the top of the mountain, he came to a huge rock that was polished like a mirror and stuck with a few seals on it. Zhang Kongyun slowly stopped. He stretched out his hand and gently stroked the 3 words deeply engraved on the rock, "Wind, Dust, Stone." Zhang Kongyun gently stroked the surface of the rock, and his expression suddenly became very lonely. He slowly sat down beside the Wind, Dust, Stone and said as if to himself, "Old friend, guess who I saw today? Hey, it's the 7-tailed fox spirit. Don't worry, it's not your Ao Wushuang, but it's very similar to her. It should be her disciple. You've been here for a long time, so you must miss her very much, right? Alas, you have such a high cultivation talent, why can't you see through it? Since ancient times, no one who has been with a fox spirit has a good ending." Zhang Kongyun sighed for a while. Only the sound of the wind on the surrounding mountains responded to him. Zhang Kongyun shook his head and said, "You still don't want to see me? Forget it, I won't force you. However, today, I met another cultivator whose cultivation talent is not inferior to yours. Just like you, he is infatuated with a 7-tailed fox demon. I think, very soon, you will have a companion. When the time comes, you won't be lonely. By the way, in a month or so, it will be the day when your disciple Zi Yuan takes over as the head of the Linggong sect. Aren't you worried? Don't worry, I will help her. However, I can't decide the affairs of the Zhengyi school alone. Now that I think about it, 4th Shixiang and 7th Shixiang will soon come out of seclusion. I don't know how their cultivation quotients are. As he spoke, Zhang Kongyun stood up, patted the dust off his buttocks, and said, I came in a hurry today, so I didn't bring you wine. I'll bring it to you another day. I'll go first. After Zhang Kongyun finished speaking, his figure flashed and disappeared in an instant. A long time after he left, a tall man with long black hair suddenly appeared in his previous position. This man had his back to the wind-dust stone, and his eyes were dreamy. He looked at the secular world at the foot of the mountain like an otherworldly immortal. He was silent for a long time, and a meaningful smile slowly appeared on the corner of his mouth. Chapter 600. Li Yundong and Su Chan went all the way down the mountain. When they were out of the sphere of influence of Mount Longhu, Su Chan breathed a sigh of relief. She patted her chest and said in shock, We came here for nothing. I was almost scared to death. I thought I was going to be caught by them. Li Yundong chuckled. With me here, do they think they can catch you? Dream on. Su Chan said worriedly, but I'm afraid of getting you into trouble. Li Yundong pinched the tip of Su Chan's nose with a doting expression and said with a smile, Silly, you have to have confidence in yourself. You are a seven-tailed fox spirit. Su Chan made a face at him. I've been a burden for too long. I can't get used to it. Li Yundong laughed, patted the little girl's round and perky buttocks, and said with a smile, Don't play tricks. Let's go back. Watch net. How was it? It was exciting and fun, right? Su Chan let out a cry and covered her buttocks. She pouted and said, It's quite exciting, but it's not so fun. Besides, we've made a wasted trip. Li Yundong smiled. A wasted trip? Not necessarily. At least I know that there is such a powerful Jinshin master in the Jingyi school. As he said this, Li Yundong pondered for a moment and said in a deep voice, But, what does this guy mean by a real Jinshin fight? Su Chan said disapprovingly, This guy must be deliberately mystifying. Don't worry about him. However, Li Yundong shook his head and said, No, there must be something wrong. Maybe after a cultivator reaches the Jinshin phase, the routine and method of fighting will change, but I can't guess what changes will happen in a short time. It's best to figure it out in advance. Otherwise, when the time comes, we'll suffer a great loss. Su Chan thought for a moment and said, Then go back and ask my master. She should know. Li Yundong nodded. That's the only way. After they left Mount Longhu, they flew all the way to Mount Tianlong. It only took them one afternoon to get there. When they arrived at the secret chamber of the Fox Zen school, the sky had just darkened. When Li Yunyang and Su Chan's young spirit returned to the training room in the secret room, they found that Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin had already woken up from their meditation. She could vaguely sense that there was some Yuanyin qi in Li Yundong's pure Yuanyang qi. For a moment, she couldn't help but feel her heart skip a beat, as if she had thought of something inappropriate for children. She couldn't help but blush, and for a moment, she forgot to ask where Li Yundong had gone. Zhou Qin had only been cultivating for a short time, so she couldn't detect his abnormality. She asked curiously, Master, where did you and Su Chan go? Li Yundong told her about his trip to Mount Longhu with a smile, but he hid his intention of going to Mount Longhu to argue for Zi Yuan. After that, Li Yundong asked Zi Yuan, do you know what a real Jinshin fight is? However, Zi Yuan didn't seem to hear his words. Her eyes were fixed, and for a moment, she seemed to be in a daze. It wasn't until he called her name twice that her cheeks turned red and she said as if she had just woken up from a dream, Ah? What did you just say? Li Yundong looked at Zi Yuan with a strange expression and wondered in his heart, what's wrong with this girl? Why does she look like she's lost her soul? Li Yundong had no choice but to repeat what he had just said. Zi Yuan calmed down, shook her head, and said, a real Jinshin fight? I don't know. I've never seen two golden body masters fight. It's already amazing for cultivators to cultivate to the Yangshin phase. The Jinshin phase is really too rare. Cultivators who have reached this phase all cherish their feathers very much and don't easily fight with others. It was really too difficult to see two golden body experts fight. Not only have I never seen it, but my master has also never mentioned it to me. So. Zi Yuan looked at Li Yundong apologetically and said. I'm really sorry. I don't know either. Li Yundong chuckled and said, there's something you don't know? Huh, it's okay. When we go back, we'll ask Senior Ao Wushuang and see if she knows. Zi Yuan nodded and said with a smile, Senior Ao Wushuang is experienced and knowledgeable. She should know. Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, although it's not time to come out of seclusion yet, I still want to know what a real Jinshin fight is immediately. If I don't understand this question, I don't think I can calm down in meditation. Why don't I go back and ask first? You guys can continue to cultivate here in seclusion? Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin nodded with a smile. Although Su Chan really wanted to go back with Li Yundong, seeing that Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin had stayed, she was too embarrassed to stay by Li Yundong's side. She grabbed Li Yundong's arm and said pitifully, you have to come back as soon as possible. Li Yundong chuckled and said, you make it sound like I won't come back, silly. If I'm fast, I'm afraid I'll be back in 2 or 3 hours. Only then did the little girl turn from worry to joy and giggle. Li Yundong said goodbye to Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin and returned to Tiannan City in his yang spirit body. He flew very fast all the way, and it didn't take long for him to return home in Tiannan City. This time, Li Yundong didn't enter through the back door. Instead, he chose to go through the front door. When he walked to the door and wanted to find the key to open the door, he found that he had come out in his yang spirit body. Not only was he penniless, but he didn't even have the key to his house. Li Yundong couldn't help but smile bitterly and say, it seems that I still have to go through the back door in the future. Li Yundong raised his hand and knocked on the door. After knocking twice, the door was suddenly pulled open. A girl scolded, hey, you little Japanese, are you done? The girl was only halfway through her scolding when she immediately choked. She stared at Li Yundong with her eyes wide open and said in surprise, Leader? Ah, Leader is back. This girl was Ling Yu. As soon as she shouted, everyone in the Fox Zen school immediately rushed out. Chris also ran out of the room and looked at Li Yundong in surprise, as if she didn't understand why he had suddenly come back. Ao Wushuang also came out of her room and looked at Li Yundong strangely. She instinctively felt that something was wrong and asked, Leader, what happened? Li Yundong looked at everyone curiously, and his eyes fell on Ling Yu. He asked curiously, I should be the one asking this question, shouldn't I? What happened to you? Ling Yu, who were you scolding just now? Ling Yu smiled at Li Yundong and said, Leader, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scold you. There were always 2 Japanese people blocking our door and saying that they wanted to see you. But weren't you in seclusion? It's impossible for you to see them, right? I told them the truth, but the 2 Japanese people didn't believe me. They kept blocking the door and clamoring to see you. I was annoyed by them, so. As Ling Yu spoke, she curiously poked her head out of the door and murmured, it's strange. Why haven't I seen the 2 Japanese people? Have they finally figured it out and left? Li Yundong became more and more confused. 2 Japanese people looking for me? What's the matter? At this time, Ao Wushuang answered, didn't you receive a letter of challenge from Jinyan Tantrism before? Li Yundong nodded. I did. Does it have anything to do with this? Ao Wushuang said, yes, one of the 2 Japanese people is a guy named Sayonji Tsunekatsu. He has been insisting that you go with him to Mount Koya immediately. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. Isn't it my own business whether I go or not? Do you want to tie me up if I don't want to go? Ling Yu quickly nodded and said, yes, that's what they mean. Li Yundong's face darkened, and he said unhappily, really? At this time, the little foxes also said, yes, Leader, the words of these 2 Japanese people are so unpleasant. We are so angry that our lungs are going to explode. Li Yundong frowned secretly and said lightly, "Humph, I hit the younger one, and the older one is anxious. If she really wants revenge, let her come to me herself. I won't go." Ao Wushuang also smiled and said, "I think so too. However, leader, there is another very important thing. We have always wanted to tell you immediately, but we were afraid that it would affect your seclusion." Li Yundong asked curiously, "What is it?" Ao Wushuang said seriously, "The Medicine King tripod has been found, and it was found by a local villager in Mount Huangshan. Now he has sent it to an auction house to auction it." Li Yundong was shocked. "Ah. The Medicine King tripod? Auction? No way. What about the other sects? Do they know?" Ao Wushuang shook her head and smiled helplessly. "We saw the news on TV. Do you think they know?" Li Yundong suddenly stood where he was, his eyes staring blankly. He couldn't come to his senses for a while. After a long time, he sighed bitterly and said, "It's money again, isn't it?" At this time, everyone in the Fox Zen school nodded in unison. Yes, yes. When Li Yundong thought of money, he felt a headache. He had thought that after opening the Desanxian shop, he could finally be self-sufficient, but he hadn't expected that there would be more and more places to use money, and it was getting more and more frightening. When he had gone down the Zhuji phase from the Himalayas, he had met Wu Hao and LV Fengping who wanted to snatch the Fan of Seven Treasures. At first, Wu Hao had even offered a high price of 20 million yuan to buy the Fan of Seven Treasures in Li Yundong's hands. It could be seen that the price of a powerful magical weapon was really terrifying. Although the Fan of Seven Treasures was also a powerful magical weapon, there were thousands of powerful magical weapons used for fighting in the cultivation world, and there were even hundreds of first-class high-level powerful magical weapons. The Medicine King tripod was the only top magical weapon that could be used for alchemy. Whoever had the Medicine King tripod would have the possibility of refining Renyuan Jindan, Diyuan Jindan, and even Tianyuan Fairy Pill. It could even be said that the Medicine King tripod was a powerful magical weapon that could change the power pattern of the cultivation world. Who wouldn't be jealous of such a powerful magical weapon? Who wouldn't want it? If all the sects and schools knew the news, they would definitely flock to it. On the day of the auction, there would definitely be a fierce capital fight and a battle of gold yuan. At that time, Li Yundong didn't even dare to think about what kind of sky-high price the Medicine King tripod would sell for. Dharma, wealth, companionship, and earthly treasures. Alas, wealth, wealth. Li Yundong couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Why am I so poor? Sure enough, if you haven't heard the Tao, the difficulty lies in the Dharma. If you have heard the Tao, the difficulty lies in wealth. Li Yundong was extremely depressed and thought, do I have to give up the Medicine King tripod? Retreat in the face of difficulties? But, to watch the Medicine King tripod be taken away by others, this is too uncomfortable, isn't it? Should I take the Medicine King tripod or not? This was a question worth considering. Chapter 601. Li Yundong was worried about the Medicine King tripod when Chris suddenly whispered to him, "Sure. Li Yundong, I still have some money. If you need it, I can give it to you first. Watch net." Li Yundong turned his head and looked at the blonde nominal disciple. He shook his head with a smile and said, "I appreciate your kindness, but I'm afraid you don't have enough money. You saw it that day on Heaven Capital Peak. So many cultivators fought for their magic treasures. That kind of tragedy is really shocking. You can also imagine how important a treasure the Medicine King tripod is. When the time comes, the price of the auction will definitely be bought by the big tycoons. People from small sects like us." At this point, Li Yundong smiled bitterly and shook his head. "Forget it." The other people of the Fox Zen school shouted in surprise, "Leader, are we going to give up the Medicine King tripod just like that?" Li Yunyang smiled and said, "We have already got 3 Diyuan Jindan. There were 4 pills in one furnace, and we got 3. This is already very profitable. As a man, we should be content. If he got the Medicine King tripod, God would probably not be able to stand it anymore. Moreover, we have already used the Millennium Snow Lotus. How could it be so easy to find another Millennium Snow Lotus to use as a medicinal catalyst? Even if they get the Medicine King tripod, other cultivation sects can only refine Renyuan Jindan at most. They can never refine Dun Jindan. The little foxes of the Fox Zen school suddenly realized and said, "Leader is right. We don't want this Medicine King tripod, so as not to provoke jealousy again." Lingyu muttered softly, "No matter how I look at it, it looks like the sect leader is saying that the grapes are sour because he can't eat them." Li Yundong pretended to be angry and glared at Lingyu. "Will you die if you don't expose me?" The whole Fox Zen school burst out laughing. Li Yundong smiled. He turned to Ao Wushuang and said, "Senior Ao Wushuang, I have something to ask you in private." Ao Wushuang smiled and said, "If you have something to say, just say it. You don't have to be so polite." Li Yundong pointed to his room and smiled. "Let's talk in my room." Ao Wushuang was a little confused. After following him into the room, she asked curiously, "What's so mysterious?" Li Yunyang told her about his fight with Zhang Kongyun in Mount Longhu and then asked, "Senior Ao Wushuang, is there anything different about Jinshin fighting methods? Why did Zhang Kongyun say that he would let me see the real golden body fight? Is he pretending to be mysterious, or is it true?" At first, Ao Wushuang listened to his words with a smile on her face, but when he mentioned Zhang Kongyun, the smile on her face suddenly sank. Her face seemed to be covered with a layer of frost, and she said coldly, "Zhang Kongyun." "Hey, Zhang Kongyun." Seeing Ao Wushuang gnashing her teeth, Li Yunyang couldn't help but think of some of Zhang Kongyun's words before. He asked curiously, "Senior Ao Wushuang, do you know this Zhang Kongyun?" Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "Of course. Back then, he and the leader of the Jingyi school had captured Wang Yuanshan together. Of course, he knew him. Humph, even if he turned into ashes, I would still know him." Li Yunyang saw that the grudge between the two of them was related to Wang Yuanshan, a cultivator of the previous generation. Ao Wushuang's eyes were full of fire, as if she wanted to tear Zhang Kongyun to pieces immediately. He didn't want to touch on Ao Wushuang's painful memories, so he changed the topic and said, "Senior Ao Wushuang, you must have seen the fight between Jinshin masters, right?" Ao Wushuang sneered again and again. "Of course. Wang Yuanshan, Zhang Kongyun, and Zhang Tianshi of the Jingyi school were all Jinshin masters at that time. Moreover, Wang Yuanshan was at the top level of the Jinshin, Zhang Tianshi was also at the top level, and even Zhang Kongyun was at the middle level of the Jinshin. That battle. Hey, how could I forget it?" As Ao Wushuang spoke, her eyes became very distant, as if she had gone back to 10 years ago. She murmured in a low voice as if she was talking in her sleep, "It was also because of this battle that I made up my mind to cultivate hard." Li Yunyang asked with concern, "Senior Ao Wushuang, can you tell me what's the difference between a Jinshin fight and a Yang spirit fight?" Ao Wushuang closed her eyes, as if recalling the past. After a long time, she opened her eyes and said to Li Yunyang, "Do you want to know the difference? Yang spirit, come with me to the sky. I'll show you." Li Yunyang was originally a Yang spirit body. When he saw Ao Wushuang's figure disappear from the room in a flash, he immediately followed her and flew into the air. It was already late at night, and there were many dense clouds in the sky. The two of them were flying in the air, and it was impossible to see their figures at all. Ao Wushuang stopped in the air and said to Li Yunyang, "You have now cultivated to the Jinshin phase, but your level of fighting is still in the Yang spirit phase. Moreover, the most important thing is that you have never seen a real Jinshin fight, so you can't imagine what a Jinshin fight will be like. Therefore, you are very worried that you will lose in a fight with a Jinshin master in the future, right?" Li Yunyang nodded. "That's right." Ao Wushuang smiled faintly and said, the fighting methods of Jinshin masters are different. Although I am not a Jinshin master, I have seen what a Jinshin master's fighting methods look like. I can simulate the scene for you to see and you can refer to it. Li Yunyang's face lit up with joy. Thank you, Senior Ao Wushuang. Ao Wushuang smiled slightly and said, you don't have to call me senior all the time. Don't you think I'm too old? As she said this, she smiled. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning flew out from her side, and in the blink of an eye, she rushed to Li Yundong's face. Although this was similar to a sneak attack, Li Yundong was a Jinshin master after all, and his cultivation was higher than Ao Wushuang's. He subconsciously ran his Jinshi all over his body, and the protective Jinshin blocked the sneak attack. With a clang, a 3 feet long Qingfeng sword suddenly appeared in front of Li Yundong. The sharp blade of the sword kept spinning and cutting at a high speed, like a saw chain, crazily cutting at Li Yundong's body. This sharp sword was the Bahuang sword. As soon as it was blocked, it instantly turned into a rolling iron lotus, crushing toward Li Yundong like an iron blood meat grinder. Li Yundong only felt that a terrifying force was constantly pressing down on his Jinshin, shaking his qi and blood all over his body. He faintly felt that his Jinshin was about to be shaken out of his body. Li Yundong's expression froze, and he immediately wanted to take out the fan of 7 treasures to resist the enemy. But as soon as he moved his mind, he saw that Ao Wushuang's 5-element magic had almost hit his face at the same time. At the same time, she appeared behind him in an instant. With a stern shout, her 5 fingers were like knives, stabbing toward the Lingtai acupoint on his back. This series of attacks was really like a storm, as fast as thunder and lightning. If Li Yundong hadn't been a Jinshin, he might have been defeated in an instant. However, Li Yundong relied on his Jinshin to withstand the most powerful attack of the Bahuang sword. He quickly recovered and slapped the Akalanatha fundamental seal in front of him. It immediately shook Ao Wushuang's magic into ashes, and even Ao Wushuang was sent flying more than 10 meters away by this powerful Buddhist power. Ao Wushuang flew a long way before she stopped. With a wave of her hand, the Bahuang sword instantly changed back to its original form and returned to her back. She flew back to Li Yundong and asked, "How is it? What do you feel?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "Senior Ao Wushuang, I just feel that your speed of making moves is much faster than that of ordinary Yang spirit masters." Several moves were made almost at the same time. But other than that, I don't seem to feel anything special. Ao Wushuang smiled slightly and said, "Because I'm not a Jinshin master, I can only simulate the characteristics of a Jinshin master's fight. I can't be like them, who can attack you at the same time with several doppelgangers." As she said this, Ao Wushuang flew to Li Yundong, stretched out her hand, and slowly pointed 2 fingers at Li Yundong's chest like a sword. She said, "If this is my Bahuang sword, I will use my Jinshin doppelgangers and use the power of Jinshin to attack your chest." Although your indestructible Jinshin can block powerful magical weapons, it can't block the power of my Jinshin. What will you do? Li Yundong didn't even think about it and immediately said, "Use the fan of 7 treasures, which also has the power of Jinshin, to resist it." Ao Wushuang smiled slightly and stretched out another finger noncommittally. She pointed at Li Yundong's shoulder and said, "If I use the magic of Jinshin to attack your flank, what will you do?" Li Yundong said without hesitation, "Use the Mahamudra of Jinshin to block it." Ao Wushuang chuckled and her figure instantly split into 2 figures. The other one appeared behind Li Yunyang and pointed at his back. She said, "What if I use another powerful magical weapon to attack your back? What will you do?" Li Yundong frowned. He thought for a moment and said, "Use the Dharmakaya of wisdom with 3 heads and 6 arms to resist it." Ao Wushuang smiled and suddenly appeared above Li Yundong's head again. She pointed at the top of his head with her hand and said, "If I attack you with a powerful magical weapon at this time, what will you do?" Li Yundong was stunned. "Where did you get so many powerful magical weapons?" Ao Wushuang laughed and said, "How many powerful magical weapons do you have? If you have so many powerful magical weapons, why can't other people have them? Moreover, Jinshin masters are top cultivators. At such a realm, they would be ashamed to see others if they didn't have 4 or 5 powerful magical weapons with them. Li Yundong hesitated for a moment. He thought about the countermeasures and said, then I can only use my sword to deal with the enemy. Ao Wushuang snorted and said with a faint smile, we've been talking on paper for a while. Why don't you try to do what I just said at the same time? Imagine if someone attacked you from all directions at the same time. Can you deal with so many attacks at the same time? Li Yundong thought for a moment and tried to mobilize his Jinshi to control multiple powerful magical weapons at the same time. He also made a Mahamudra at the same time and divided the power of Jinshin into many parts. However, as soon as he tried, he felt that the Jinshi in his body was in a mess, and the powerful magical weapons seemed to be half a beat slower. It was completely different from what he had imagined. Li Yundong's face suddenly became very ugly. He said in surprise, what's going on? I can understand why the Jinshi in my body is in chaos. After all, I have to divide the power of Jinshin into several unequal clones to defend myself, so it's inevitable that there will be problems. But why is the reaction of the powerful magical weapons also not sensitive? In the past, when Li Yundong controlled the powerful magical weapons, they would arrive in an instant as soon as he thought about it. He could defeat the enemy and retreat to ensure that he could retreat unscathed. But now, there was a slow delay. Although it was less than a second, for cultivators who were fighting, even 0. 1 second was enough to determine the outcome and life and death. Ao Wushuang chuckled and said, do you know the power of Jinshin in a fight? Although your strength has reached the Jinshin phase, your fighting level has not kept up. You can't attack from all directions with several Jinshin clones at the same time, let alone control several powerful magical weapons to attack at the same time. Because your inner cultivation hasn't kept up, you can't multitask. Li Yundong couldn't help asking, then how can I improve my cultivation in this aspect? Ao Wushuang shook her head and said, I can't help you, but I remember that I also asked Wang Yuanshan a similar question. He told me something at that time. Li Yundong quickly asked, what did he say? Ao Wushuang's face was quite serious, and she said very seriously, this sentence is, this body can't be used outside. Thank you for your concern. Tang, I will take good care of my body, In addition, thank you for the PK votes. This month, I finally broke the 0 record with PK votes. Chapter 602. This body can't be outside the body? Li Yundong was stunned and asked curiously, what does this mean? Li Yundong knew that this body couldn't be outside the body. This sentence was a famous saying of Zhang Jixian, the 30th Taoist master of the Zhini school. In short, this sentence could be changed to 4 words that the other 4 old, young, women, and children were familiar with, all methods belong to the origin. The meaning of all methods belong to the origin meant that no matter who it was, what sect it was, or what Taoist magic they practiced, they must first cultivate their mind and body, accumulate Taoist skills, and condense divine qi to integrate with the Tao, so as to achieve the goal of redeeming others and themselves. Go to the internet. But how can I condense divine qi to integrate with the Tao? This sentence was simple to say, but it was completely different to do it. Ao Wushuang laughed. She seemed to have expected that Li Yundong would ask such a question. She said, I also asked Wang Yuanshan. Do you know what he answered me? Li Yundong asked curiously, what did he say? Ao Wushuang smiled slightly and said, he said, the Tao begets 1, 1 begets 2, 2 begets 3, and 3 begets all things. Man follows the earth follows the heaven follows the Tao, and the Tao follows nature. Li Yundong was stunned. He had seen this sentence at the Taoist assembly and had also said to Zhou Qin, this sentence explains all the meaning of cultivation. However, when this sentence was taken out alone, he understood what it meant, but what did it mean now? What did it mean for the cultivation of Jinshin fighting methods? Although Li Yundong had broken through to the Jinshin phase, possessing the power of Jinshin did not mean that he could perfectly exert this power. Ao Wushuang's words had made him fall into a chaotic mystery. Although Li Yundong had a profound knowledge of Taoist magic cultivation and a strong talent for fighting methods, he felt that there was always a thin layer of gauze in front of him. It seemed that as long as he gently poked it, he could come to a new world. But Li Yundong found that he was always blocked outside the door of this world. He wandered back and forth, but he could not enter. Ao Wushuang's words were like a bolt of lightning in his mind, instantly illuminating the chaotic darkness around him, allowing him to see this strange world clearly. But it was only for a moment. Soon, Li Yundong fell into endless sleepiness and darkness again. What he had just touched seemed to be out of reach again. He seemed to have understood something, but it also seemed like he didn't understand anything at all. Ao Wushuang looked at him in a daze. She smiled slightly and said, "Take your time to think about it. I'm a little tired. I'll go back to my room to rest first." At this time, Li Yunyang was thinking about Ao Wushuang's words. He answered Ao Wushuang blankly and fell into deep thought in the air alone. Ao Wushuang didn't disturb Li Yundong, so she flew home alone. But when Ao Wushuang was about to fly home, a white light suddenly flashed in front of her. Ao Wushuang quickly clamped her hands and immediately caught a paper crane that was flapping its wings. There were a few words written on the wings of the paper crane. Ao Wushuang frowned and glanced at the wings on the paper crane. She quickly looked around. After making sure that there was nothing unusual, she turned around and flew in another direction. Ao Wushuang flew all the way to the old house in Tiannan City. She pushed the door open and entered. She saw Lu Yi sitting leisurely on the square table in the front yard, drinking tea by himself. Ao Wushuang frowned and stood at the door, but she refused to come in. She said coldly, "What's the matter?" Lu Yi didn't look at her. He just pointed to an empty teacup and a stool opposite him and said, "You're here? Sit down." Ao Wushuang hesitated for a moment and walked in, but she still didn't sit down. She said, "If you have something to say, just say it. I'm very busy and don't have much time." Lu Yi snorted and said, "You're busy watching TV and soap operas with the little guys at home every day? Hey, Wushuang, you're really busy." Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "It's better than someone who is busy scheming all day long." Lu Yi smiled slightly and said, "Do you know why I asked you to come here today?" Ao Wushuang said impolitely, "Don't beat around the bush. Just say it." Lu Yi didn't care about Ao Wushuang's attitude. There was a flash of fanaticism in his eyes. He dipped his hand in the tea and wrote a few words on the table. Ao Wushuang took a look and saw that Lu Yi had written, February 2nd. Ao Wushuang was stunned. February 2nd? What do you mean? There seemed to be a blazing flame in Lu Ye's eyes, and his whole body was full of irrepressible excitement. February 2nd of the lunar calendar, this is the day when the mystical silver fox will be resurrected. What? So soon? Ao Wushuang was shocked. She immediately sat down and asked in surprise, "Why is it on this day?" Lu Yi couldn't help laughing. February 2nd, the dragon raises its head. Are you surprised? Yes, you can't think of it, and neither can those bald donkeys. Hee, I have to thank that bunch of Japanese people for this. These days, I've been thinking about how to release the sealed soul and spirit of the mystical silver fox. Now, I finally have a way. Ao Wushuang's eyes narrowed. Do you have a spy around Li Jiandong? Who? Chao Yi? Lu Yuehong? Or someone else? Lu Yi twirled his beard and said proudly, "You don't have to worry about that, but I need you to do something for me." Ao Wushuang's face was as dark as water. She said, "What is it?" "If it's against Li Jiandong, I won't do it." Lu Yi frowned and said unhappily, "Do you really think of him as the leader?" Ao Wushuang said angrily, "Nonsense. With Chan'er's character, if she knew that I had trapped Li Jiandong in an unjust situation, do you think she would still recognize me as her master? I can be alone for the rest of my life, but I can't watch Chon'er follow in my footsteps. Therefore, as long as anyone wants to do something against them, they have to go through me first. Ao Wushuang's words were sonorous and powerful, and her tone revealed a dignified aura that could not be offended. Lu Yi narrowed his eyes slightly. After a long time, he slowly smiled and said, "Good, good. You haven't changed at all. However, this matter is beneficial to Li Jiandong. Are you relieved to say so?" Ao Wushuang's face softened slightly. She said in a deep voice, "What is it?" Lu Yi twirled his beard and said with a smile, "It's very simple. No matter what method you use, you must ensure that Li Jiandong goes to Mount Koya and has a fight with Masako Tachibana, the goddess of Jinyin Tantrism." Ao Wushuang asked suspiciously, "Why? Why do you want me to go?" Li Yundong seemed to be an easygoing person, but he was a very opinionated person, who could not be easily influenced by others. "And why did you ask him to go to Mount Koya?" "I've seen Masako Tachibana of Jinyin Tantrism. She's not a person to be trifled with. Her cultivation and kung fu are very strong and abnormal. You asked him to fight with Masako Tachibana, and you said that it was beneficial and harmless? Are you out of your mind? I think this is something that will only bring harm and no benefit." Lu Yi laughed and said, "If Li Jiandong wins against Masako Tachibana, he will become the first person in the Chinese cultivation world in the past 50 years. No one has ever been able to defeat the top cultivators in Japan. At that time, he will gain both fame and fortune." Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "What's the use of this kind of reputation? The tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. Even if you don't understand this, do you think he doesn't?" No matter how good Lu Ye's self-restraint was, he couldn't stand Ao Wushuang contradicting him again and again. He said angrily, "Enough. Li Jiandong must go to Mount Koya. As long as he goes, Masako Tachibana will definitely hold a grand cultivation party. At that time, almost all the cultivation sects in Japan will go there, and all the famous cultivators will participate. Even the members of the Abe family will go there. At that time." "Humph." Ao Wushuang frowned and said, "What? Do you want to catch all the Japanese cultivation world in one fell swoop?" Lu Yi sneered and said, "Do you think I'm crazy? Even the mystical silver fox can't do this kind of thing. Can I do it? I just need an opportunity to attract the attention of all the people in the Japanese cultivation world. As long as there is this opportunity, I can take advantage of the situation and release the sealed remnant soul of the mystical silver fox." Ao Wushuang's heart skipped a beat. She suddenly widened her eyes and said involuntarily, "You mean?" Lu Yi laughed and said, "Do you understand? Isn't it a great opportunity? Think about it. Even if it's for your disciple Su Chan, you have to do it. Otherwise." "Humph." Ao Wushuang stared at Lu Yi, and her expression changed. After a long time, she was a little shaken and said unwillingly, "But how can you guarantee that Li Jiandong will win and get away?" Lu Yi said disapprovingly, "How could the reincarnation of Wisdom King lose? According to the relationship between God and Buddha, Li Jiandong can be regarded as the ancestor of the Japanese cultivators. These bastards should kowtow to him." Ao Wushuang was so angry that she laughed. "Do you really think that the excuse of the reincarnation of Wisdom King is a panacea that can cure all diseases? Do you know how many reincarnated living Buddhas have died in history since ancient times? You have to figure it out. Li Jiandong is just a reincarnation now, not the real body of Dharmaraja. Do you want to be invincible in the world? Let's talk about it when he transcends the thunder tribulation, becomes a golden immortal, and gets the divine power." Lu Yi also said angrily, "Then what do you want me to do? Do you know how long I've been planning for this day? I've even given him the Renyuan Jindan and the Dun Jindan. What else do you want me to do? Do you think I'm taking fewer risks than him? Do you know who I'm going to face? It's Abe, one of the most terrifying existences in the Japanese cultivation world, the Abe family. When Ao Wushuang heard the surname Abe, she was also shocked. She took a deep breath and said, "That's what you're planning? How dare you pull the tiger's teeth? Don't you know that the Abe family has been guarding the remnant soul of the mystical silver fox for 900 years? Lu Yi sneered and said, "Of course I know, but it's precisely because of this that I can succeed." Ao Wushuang's face darkened and she didn't speak for a long time. After a while, she stood up and walked out without saying yes or no. When she reached the door, Lu Yi suddenly stopped her and said, "Wushuang, if you're worried about Li Jiandong, you might as well give him your Bahuang sword. Maybe the combination of the two swords will increase his chances of winning." Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "Do you also know that his chances of winning are low? The combination of the two swords. Humph, do you think it's as simple as eating and cooking?" After that, Ao Wushuang went out without hesitation. At this time, she was full of worries and didn't want to fly back immediately, so she walked slowly along Shantang alone. Although it was more than 9 o'clock in the evening, Shantang was still brightly lit. There were all kinds of colorful lights hanging high on the ancient and elegant cornices, decorating Shantang like a noble young woman, exuding a classical and dignified aura from head to toe. Ao Wushuang stopped at the place where the lights were waning. She suddenly looked back at the secular mortals playing on the street, and her eyes were full of confusion. She didn't know what kind of changes her decision would bring to Li Jiandong, Su Chan, the people around her, and even the cultivation world of China and Japan. Are these changes good or bad? On the 2nd day of February, could the mystical silver fox really be resurrected? What would happen if she was resurrected? Ao Wushuang gradually hid her figure in the shadows. She casually took out the Bahuang sword behind her and pulled it out of its sheath. The Bahuang sword was carved with exquisite patterns. The long sword trembled slightly in her hand and buzzed, like a loyal servant who had seen his master and couldn't help making a sound of joy. Ao Wushuang looked at the Bahuang sword in her hand with a complicated look in her eyes and murmured in a low voice, "Shibua is right. Only when the two swords are combined can you be a real powerful magical weapon. Only when you are together, are you the divine swords in the world. Even if something goes wrong in the future, with the two swords in hand, even if Li Jiandong can't beat Masako Tachibana, he can still escape. Yuan Shan. It's probably time for the sword you left me to change its owner." Chapter 603. When Li Yundong returned to Mount Tianlong, it was already the morning of the next day. In the secret room of the Fox Zen school, Li Yundong repeatedly thought about what Ao Wushuang had said. Watch net. 7kom.com. This body cannot exist outside the body. Tao begets 1, 1 begets 2, 2 begets 3, 3 begets all things. Man follows the earth follows the heaven follows the Tao, and the Tao follows the nature. What is the meaning of these in the practice of Jinshin fighting methods? What was he referring to? Li Yundong almost broke his head thinking about it, but he still couldn't figure out the meaning of these words. When Zi Yuan, Su Chan, and Zhou Qin woke up from their meditation, Li Yundong couldn't help but ask Zi Yuan the questions in his heart. However, Zi Yuan's face was also full of doubts, and she soon fell into deep thought. If Zi Yuan was like this, Su Chan and Zhou Qin were staring at each other with their eyes wide open. One of them was a half-baked little fox, and the other was the daughter of a rich family who had only been cultivating for a few months. Asking them to answer these questions was even more difficult than asking Pushkin to write a 7-character quatrain in Chinese. Looking at Zi Yuan, who was deep in thought, Zhou Qin, who was staring blankly, and the little girl who was scratching her ears and cheeks, Li Yundong knew that it seemed that only he could solve this problem. In the past, the days where he could always have someone to assist him in his cultivation were gone forever. Seeing his frown, Zi Yuan couldn't help but comfort him. Don't always be entangled in this problem. There are some things that you can only obtain if you know how to let go. Cultivation is the same principle. If you keep on clinging to this problem and refuse to let it go, be careful that you will go berserk. Li Yundong thought for a moment and smiled with relief. What you said makes sense, but what I'm most troubled about now is not this matter, but the Medicine King tripod. Su Chan asked curiously, have you found the Medicine King tripod? Li Yundong shook his head and smiled, as if he was very emotional about the impermanence of the world. He smiled and said, yes, but it was found by a local villager in Mount Huangshan. Now, this magic treasure has already been sent to the auction house, and it will be auctioned in 2 days. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin all widened their eyes and exclaimed in unison, what? Is the Medicine King tripod going to be auctioned? Li Yundong saw that the three of them looked as if they had seen a ghost, as if aliens were going to attack the earth in the next second. He couldn't help laughing. It's strange, isn't it? When I first heard about it, I felt the same way as you did. But that was the truth. Moreover, this news was spread through the TV news. I reckon that the cultivation world is now boiling with excitement. Zi Yuan said with a worried face, if such a powerful magical weapon falls into the hands of someone with evil intentions, the consequences are unimaginable. Compared with Zi Yuan's benevolence and compassion, Zhou Qin was obviously more practical and utilitarian. She frowned and said, the most important thing is that we can't let this powerful magical weapon fall into the hands of our enemy, otherwise. Zhou Qin was not only the beneficiary of the Renyuan Jindan, but also the beneficiary of the Dun Jindan. She naturally knew the value of the Medicine King tripod. A Renyuan Jindan alone was enough for a cultivator like her, who had just entered the sect, to fight to the death with a young spirit master who had cultivated for many years. Once the enemy sect got the Medicine King tripod, even if it didn't produce a large number of Renyuan Jindan, even if it produced 3 or 4 more, it would still bring great threat to them. Su Chan was much simpler. For the little girl, whether the Medicine King tripod was important or not depended on Li Yundong's opinion. If he wanted the Medicine King tripod, then this powerful magical weapon must not fall into the hands of others. If he didn't want it, then it could go wherever he liked. Anyway, she didn't want to ask. As long as she could accompany her master, it was fine. The little girl blinked her eyes, turned her face to look at Li Yundong, and said, Yundong, are we going to bid? Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, where do we get the money to bid? Zhou Qin opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but she quickly realized that her money was not enough at all. Zhou Qin thought for a moment and said tentatively, why don't we all pool our money together and see how much money we can get? She pondered for a moment, then suddenly asked, by the way, I found a lot of damaged antique calligraphy and paintings in a secret room. Li Yundong, do you know what's going on? If these antique calligraphy and paintings were all in good condition, you wouldn't have to worry about money now. When Li Yundong heard this, he immediately complained in his heart, well, Zi Yuan, you're usually such a smart person. Why did you mention it now? Before Li Yundong could speak, he felt Su Chan gently tugging at his sleeve. Li Yundong didn't even need to look back to know that the little girl was hiding behind him and making a face. He pretended to look regretful and said, alas, I don't know which damned person burned all these antique cultural relics. I'm so angry. Su Chan stuck out her tongue behind Li Yundong and pretended to be distressed. She shook her head and sighed, yes, I don't know which damned person broke all these antique cultural relics. I'm so angry. Zi Yuan asked with a puzzled face, strange. You. How do you know that these cultural relics were burned? How do you know that these cultural relics were broken? Li Yundong and Su Chan suddenly froze. They couldn't help but look at each other, feeling very embarrassed. Li Yundong reacted very quickly. He quickly laughed and said with a dry smile, what's so strange about that? It's not like I haven't entered that stone room before. Zi Yuan still asked curiously, but how do you know that it was broken? Li Yundong's smile suddenly froze, and his laughter stopped abruptly. He was like a duck that had been strangled. His expression was stiff for a while, and then he suddenly turned his face, stared at Su Chan, and said, yes, how do you know that it was broken? Su Chan saw that Li Yundong was trying to make trouble for her, so she made a face at him. Her playful and cunning eyes seemed to say, "You can't scare me." The little girl said with a smile, "Of course I know. I saw it with my own eyes. Sister Ziyuan, let me tell you." Seeing that the situation was not good, Li Yundong quickly said with a righteous expression, "Let's not talk about this useless thing now. Let's hurry up and continue cultivating." What's the use of saying this? Can these antique calligraphy and paintings be restored? Li Yundong had the expression of a master, and his serious face seemed to be about to shine with the light of a great cultivator at any time. He waved his hand and said unquestionably, "Fellow Taoists, cultivation is difficult. It's as difficult as going to heaven. Don't worry about these trivial things. Let's all continue cultivating. I'm going to meditate." After that, Li Yundong didn't wait for Ziyuan to ask anything else. He sat cross-legged and closed his eyes. Ziyuan felt more and more strange, but she was also keenly aware of Li Yundong's strangeness, especially when she saw that Su Chan wanted to laugh but didn't dare to. She couldn't help laughing, which made her even more puzzled. Ziyuan winked at Su Chan and Zhou Qin. The three women quietly stood up and walked to another stone room. Li Yundong saw that the three of them had left and Ziyuan had finally stopped asking. He immediately breathed a sigh of relief and thought to himself, "It was so close. I almost became the biggest sinner in the antique world of China. If Ziyuan knew, wouldn't my reputation be ruined?" After Ziyuan entered the stone room, she said to Su Chan in a very low voice, "Su Chan, is Li Yundong hiding something from us? Was he the one who destroyed the things in that stone room?" Su Chan chuckled, shook her head, and said with a mysterious face, "Sister Ziyuan, I won't tell you." But Ziyuan and Zhou Qin were not fools. They looked at each other and guessed what was going on. Seeing that neither of them was willing to mention it, Ziyuan changed the topic and said, "I think Li Yundong still wants this Medicine King tripod very much, but he doesn't have the money." Zhou Qin hesitated for a moment and said softly, "I do have some money." Ziyuan thought for a moment and asked, "How much?" Zhou Qin thought for a moment and said, 500,000 yuan in cash that can be used at any time, and 2 million yuan in liquid funds that can be transferred within 2 days. Su Chan couldn't help but open her mouth wide and look at Zhou Qin in amazement. "Sister Zhou Qin, you are so rich." The little girl turned her face and looked at Ziyuan. She asked curiously, "Sister Ziyuan, how much money do you have?" Ziyuan thought for a moment and said, "Jingyi school froze the assets of our Linggong sect before. I don't know if they have been unfrozen now. If they are, there should be about 6 million yuan." Only then did Su Chan let out a cry and said, "Yes, I've forgotten what you said last time." Su Chan looked at Zhou Qin and then at Ziyuan. Her face was full of envy and admiration, but she was very sad in her heart. Sister Zhou Qin and Sister Ziyuan are so rich. They can help Yundong, but I'm a poor girl. I have nothing and can't help Yundong with anything. At this time, Zhou Qin was all focused on raising money. She didn't notice Su Chan's little girl thoughts at this time. She said, "Although I can only transfer more than 2 million yuan, I know a few reliable businessmen. If I ask them to help me, I should be able to get 10 million yuan, 10 million yuan. Ziyuan thought for a moment and asked, "Can we get 10 million yuan together, or can you get 10 million yuan?" Zhou Qin smiled and said, "It's 10 million yuan that I can gather. In fact, I can get more. With the power of my father's background, it would be a joke to say that I can only get 10 million yuan. But raising money in such a short period of time will cause a lot of trouble, and it will also bring a lot of inconvenience to my father. Besides, the other people who can lend me money are all men." As she said this, Zhou Qin looked in the direction of Li Yundong next door and whispered with a smile, "I'm afraid that he will be unhappy if he knows, so I didn't want to go to them." Ziyuan also smiled slightly. She said, 10 million yuan is not a small amount. In this way, we can get 16 million yuan. It may not be enough, but we can find 1 or 2 sects to bid together and form the proportion of the funds into the proportion of shares. When the elixir of life is refined, we can distribute it according to the proportion. Zhou Qin frowned and hesitated for a moment, then said, then do we have to share the elixirs we have worked so hard to refine with others? Zi Yuan laughed and said, it's inevitable that the Medicine King tripod will be sold at an amazing price. The best outcome we can be sure of is to ensure that it doesn't fall into the hands of the bad guys. Zhou Qin nodded and echoed, you're right. Let's make sure of this first before we talk about anything else. Zi Yuan thought for a moment and said, why don't we go back now and get things ready first? At this time, Zhou Qin was no longer in the mood to cultivate. She nodded and said, okay, I'll go back with you. Seeing that both of them were about to leave, Su Chan also shouted, I'll go back too. I also have money. Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan turned their heads curiously and said in unison, you? Su Chan saw that both of them were looking at her at the same time, so she immediately shrank her head and said in a low voice, of course, I also have a little money. Don't look down on me. Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan had been with Su Chan for a long time. They knew that this girl was an out-and-out pauper. If she suddenly knew some powerful magic at this time, they would believe it, but if this little girl suddenly became rich, they would never believe it. Both Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan couldn't help laughing. Zhou Qin smiled and said, Su Chan, you'd better keep that money for your own pocket money. It's not enough. Zi Yuan also smiled and said, Su Chan, Li Jiandong will know your kindness, but this money is really not enough. Su Chan was provoked by their words, and her heart suddenly moved. She was not convinced and said, you don't believe me? I'll go back and show it to you. I'm sure it's a lot. At that time, master. No, I saved it all at that time. Zi Yuan saw that Su Chan seemed to have spilled the beans just now, but she didn't expose her. She just smiled and said, well, let's go back first. Su Chan blurted out, but when she flew back, she couldn't help but regret it in her heart. I really don't have money, but Master does. When Master wanted to get married to Wang Yuanshan, she had prepared a generous dowry for him. I've seen this kind of money before. When I go back, I can just ask Master for it. But, will Master spend all his dowry money? Su Chan was uneasy, but she had already said it. She couldn't swallow it in front of Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin, could she? Seeing that she was about to return to her home in Tiannan City, the girl suddenly remembered what Ao Wushuang had said to her, no? Then can't we get it ourselves? This is the tradition of our Fox Zen school. The girl's eyes lit up, and her mind suddenly became active. Her pair of beautiful foxy eyes smiled like crescent moons. Yes, I can steal. Take it. Master, this time Chan'er is sorry to you again. Chapter 604. When Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin returned home, they immediately aroused the curiosity of everyone in the Fox Zen school. After understanding the reason for their return, the little foxes stared at Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin with their eyes wide open and a look of awe on their faces. Watch net. It turned out that Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan, who lived with them all day long, were 2 rich women. Chris tentatively said to Zi Yuan, I also have some money, but I'm afraid that's sure. Li Yindong doesn't want my money. Do you need it? Zhou Qin had always sympathized with Chris and had a good impression of her. She wanted to help her and asked, how many do you have? Chris thought for a moment and said, about 3 or 4 million. Although Zhou Qin vaguely knew a little about Chris' family background and knew that she had an excellent background, she didn't know that Chris was so rich. She said in surprise, Chris, you are very rich. How could he casually take out 3 or 4 million? Chris waved her hand worriedly and said, it's US dollars, not pounds. Don't expect too much. Well, it turned out that the other party felt that this little bit of money was too little to take out. Zhou Qin suddenly smiled bitterly. She turned to Zi Yuan and said, well, compared with her, we are poor people. She alone can take out more than 20 million. Zi Yuan smiled faintly and said, there is always a higher mountain in the world. But Chris is right. I believe it's not difficult for her to take out this sum of money. But it's a little difficult for Li Yundong to accept it and not think that Chris is using this money to buy people's hearts. Chris smiled awkwardly and said, I was afraid that he would misunderstand, so I didn't dare to tell him before. But I really want to help. Zi Yuan thought for a moment and said, let's count your money in for the time being. We don't have to worry about trifles in the face of important matters. If we include Crazy's money, we'll probably be able to raise about 40 million. That's not a small amount. Even if we partner with other sects, we'll still be able to get a relatively large proportion of the shares. We won't be at a disadvantage. At this time, Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong of the Fox Zen School were listening attentively. Lu Yuehong quietly pulled Chao Yi aside and said in a low voice, hey, should we also contribute? Chao Yi suddenly smiled bitterly and said, us? Who doesn't know that everyone in the Fox Zen School, from the leader to the younger generation, is a poor man? Where do we get the money? Lu Yuehong said anxiously, didn't the leader give us money from the operating profits of the Desanxian in the past? Chao Yi smiled bitterly and said, how much? Lu Yuehong said seriously, it's not about money, it's about attitude. Chao Yi thought about it seriously and nodded. You're right. The little foxes were all clever. When they heard this, they all knew that they were Chao, Shibua, Chao, Yi, and Chao, Yi, were Chao, and Yi, were Zhou, Yi, Zen, were, and Chao, Yi, and said, all, and said, they, and all, and said, the little foxes were all clever. When they heard this, they immediately reacted. They subconsciously covered their pockets and said in horror, Chao Yi Shibua. Are you serious? You even want to take our pocket money? How much does it cost? Chao Yi said angrily, it's not about money, it's about attitude. The little foxes cried and cried, Shibua Chao Yi, please be merciful. I've already spent all my pocket money. That's right. I only have a few coins in my pocket. Do you want them? My money is all in savings. Shibua Chao Yi, I can't take it out. Chao Yi was so angry that she laughed. You've spent it all? Your food and accommodation are all provided by the sect leader. Why would you need to spend money? How did he spend it? Coins? I want coins too. Hand them over. Time of life and death? Bastard, you're basically an unregistered resident. You don't even have an ID card. What kind of date of death do you have? Where is your passbook? Show it to me. In the face of Chao Yi's incorruptibility, the little foxes all handed over their private money with bitter faces. When the last little fox handed over the last coin in her pocket with tears in her eyes, they suddenly realized a problem. Why didn't Su Chan pay? In an instant, almost all the little foxes looked at Su Chan in unison. Seeing that everyone was looking at her, the little girl rolled her eyes and said quickly, I'll go get the money now. After Su Chan rushed out of Chao Yi's room, she quickly went into Ao Wushuang's room and began to rummage through it. But the little girl rummaged through it, but she couldn't find Ao Wushuang's private money. Su Chan immediately squatted by the bed in frustration, holding her cheeks in her hands and said with a frown, strange. Where could it be? Just as Su Chan was frowning, she suddenly heard a voice coming from outside. It was Ling Yu's voice. Strange, where did Su Chan go? The other little foxes also chattered, could it have slipped away? No way. We've all handed it over. Why didn't she hand it over? Alas, she's the one the leader dotes on the most. Su Chan was so angry that her mouth pouted and her face was full of displeasure. Just as she was about to go out and argue with them, she heard Ling Yu say in surprise, Shishu, you're back? Su Chan was shocked. Ah. Master is back? Although she hadn't stolen anything, Su Chan still had a guilty conscience. She immediately used the goddess Nyan Madra to hide herself. At this time, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and Chris had all returned to their respective rooms to work on the fundraising, so Ao Wushuang didn't meet them. She just nodded lightly to the little foxes outside the door and returned to her room. Su Chan saw that after Ao Wushuang entered the door, she looked confused and sleepy. She sat alone on the edge of the bed and was lost in thought. Just as Su Chan was about to slip away quietly, she suddenly found a brocade bag of 7 treasures hanging beside Ao Wushuang. The little girl's eyes suddenly lit up and she thought to herself, yes, almost all of Master's treasures are hidden in this bag. Her secret money must be hidden here too. But this 7-treasure brocade bag is right beside Master. No matter how capable I am, I can't steal anything from Master. The little girl's expression immediately collapsed. She frowned and bit her red lips tightly. Her eyes kept darting around as she quickly tried to think of a solution. After a long time, when the little girl had thought of the nth way, Ao Wushuang sighed softly. She stood up gracefully, walked to the bathroom in the bedroom, turned on the shower head, and began to fill it with hot water. Su Chan's eyes suddenly lit up. She was overjoyed and said, "Ah, Master is going to take a bath. This is a good opportunity." Su Chan watched eagerly as Ao Wushuang took off her clothes one by one and walked into the bathroom naked. After a while, the bathroom was steaming, and on the frosted glass, a curvaceous and flawless figure with a perfect body proportion could be seen. Su Chan quietly walked to the door and listened carefully. After confirming that Ao Wushuang was taking a bath, she quickly jumped onto the bed and rummaged through the 7-treasure brocade bag that Ao Wushuang carried with her. But as soon as the little girl found the 7-treasure brocade bag, she was overjoyed and was about to turn around and leave when she suddenly saw Ao Wushuang standing in front of her with a frosty face. She sneered and said, "I've caught you this time, haven't I? Humph, you want to fight with me? I found you as soon as I came in. Tell me, what do you want to do with my 7-treasure brocade bag?" Su Chan's eyes widened and she turned to look at the bathroom, only to see that the door was still closed, but there was no one inside. She immediately complained in her heart, "I was careless, careless." Su Chan smiled dryly. Her eyes darted around as she tried to come up with an excuse and reason in her mind. Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "Make it up, hurry up. You've been like this since you were a child. When you want to lie, you roll your eyes. Let's see what reason you can come up with this time." Seeing that she couldn't hide it, Su Chan had no choice but to lower her head helplessly and tell her everything. After that, she took Ao Wushuang's hand in a sad voice and begged, "Master, please help Yundong. Sister Ziyuan, Sister Zhou Qin, and even Chris can help Yundong, but I can't do anything. I'm so sad." Su Chan's words were delicate and pitiful, but Ao Wushuang was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She pointed at Su Chan and said in a trembling voice, "You evil disciple, do you still care about me? If you had come to me openly, would I not have helped you? I had planned to give this money to him a long time ago. Even if you wanted to marry him, I would have given it to you sooner or later. Wang Yuanshan and I have been separated for a long time. What's the use of keeping this money? To buy a coffin for myself?" Ao Wushuang was so angry that she trembled. She said, "But you, without telling me, dared to make decisions without authorization and steal my things. Is that what I taught you before? Even if I don't give it to you, can you steal my things? I worked hard to bring you up, teach you cultivation, teach you magic, and teach you how to deal with people. Is this how you repay me?" Su Chan was scolded by Ao Wushuang, and she was so ashamed that she couldn't show her face. She burst into tears and knelt down in front of Ao Wushuang. She hugged her knees with both hands and cried, "Master, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Don't be angry. Please forgive me." Ao Wushuang's face softened a little. She said with heartache and sadness, "Choner, I know you're sad. Li Yundong has Zi Yuan, an almost perfect partner, and Zhou Qin, an intelligent and brave girl from a rich family with a strong background. Your pressure must be unimaginable. But have you ever thought about what you value when you love someone? What does he value about you? If Li Yundong dislikes you because you're not as rich as them, then why do you still love him? What's there to love about such a man?" Ao Wushuang's words were like the evening drum and the morning bell, knocking heavily on Su Chan's heart and shocking her. The little girl wiped her tears, stood up, and said with a serious face, "Master, I know. I know what to do." Just as Su Chan was saying this, Ling Yu outside the door cheered in surprise. "Leader, you're back too." When Su Chan heard the voice, she immediately wiped away the tears on her face with both hands. Without saying a word, she rushed out of Ao Wushuang's room and rushed to her own room. Li Yundong saw that Su Chan had rushed out of Ao Wushuang's room without even saying goodbye to him and had gone back to her own room. He was curious, but he didn't think too much about it. He smiled at Ling Yu and said, "Yes, I'm always thinking about the Medicine King tripod. I have too many distracting thoughts, so I can't meditate in seclusion." Later, I found that Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin had all disappeared. I guess they were in the same situation as me. They must have come back to work on the money. Alas, as the leader, how can I be free and unfettered? Anyway, I'm not in the mood to cultivate, so I might as well come back. At this time, the little foxes also rushed over and complained, "Leader, yes, we have all taken out our money to raise the money." "That's right, leader, I don't have a penny now." Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly saw Su Chan rush out with a pink Hello Kitty piggy bank in her arms. Without saying a word, she smashed it on the ground. Li Yundong was shocked and cried out involuntarily, "Choner, what are you doing?" Su Chan didn't answer. She stared blankly at the broken piggy bank on the ground and the money falling out of it. She squatted down, picked up the money one by one, and carefully counted it. Then she looked up at Li Yundong and said, "Yundong, this is all the money I have. I hope you don't think it's too little." Li Yundong was stunned. He stared blankly at Su Chan, only to see the girl in front of him looking at him eagerly. Tears were already rolling in her eyes, as if they were going to burst out in the next second. Li Yundong couldn't help but look at the piggy bank that had been smashed to pieces on the ground. There were 2 pieces of silver keys on the ground. He suddenly remembered the time when he had first met Su Chan. Li Yundong clearly remembered that he had bought her a piggy bank. The little girl had been holding the piggy bank and smiling heartlessly. She said with a smile, "But I can't open the piggy bank. What if you secretly take the money while I'm not here?" This silly girl, she stuffed the key into the piggy bank. She can't even get the money, yet she's afraid of me taking it. But is she really afraid of me taking her money? Li Yundong suddenly remembered that when Su Chan had been injured by Lin Yofa, he had held her in his arms and taken a taxi. The little girl hadn't forgotten to hold the piggy bank even when she was running away. What had she said at that time? Ah, yes, she had said at that time, "Money, you will have no money to spend." Just when he was about to smash the piggy bank to pay the taxi fare, the little girl had taken out a 50 from her side. That was all the money she had. What had he said at that time? Ah, at that time, he had said, "Didn't you put all of it in?" But the little girl had said, "I was afraid that one day you would take the piggy bank away and leave me. I can still use the money to find you." These bits and pieces of memories flooded into Li Yundong's mind like a tide, filling his heart with bitterness. In an instant, his eyes were blurred and moist. Li Yundong forced a smile and held back his tears. He pretended to be relaxed and joked, "Silly girl, you even smashed the piggy bank. Aren't you afraid that I will despise you in the future and you will have no money to find me?" The grievances and discomfort that had accumulated in Su Chan's heart for a long time suddenly burst out. She burst into tears and threw herself into Li Yundong's arms, wailing. Yundong, I am very poor, have no money, and I am naughty. I always cause trouble for you and I can't help you, but please don't despise me. Li Yundong's eyes were filled with tears. He forced a smile and said, Silly girl, I used to be much poorer than you, but you never despised me. As he said this, Li Yundong gently took the thin stack of bills from the little girl's hand and said softly, Although you don't have much money, you have given me all you have. In my eyes, this money is more valuable than all the other money in the world combined. Do you understand? Su Chan nodded with tears in her eyes. She stared at Li Yundong blankly, feeling both sad and happy. Yundong really won't dislike me. He will never dislike me, she thought. Li Yundong hugged her tightly and kissed her deeply on her red lips. At this time, everyone in the room was stunned. Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and Chris all came out of the room. They all stared blankly at the couple, who acted as if there was no one else around. They looked at the little lovers who had gone through hardships and poverty all the way, and for a moment, they were speechless. At this time, the same thought flashed in everyone's mind. It's easy to find priceless treasures, but it's hard to find a lover. Chapter 605. It was another sunny day. Go to the internet. Calm dollar because it was a southern city, although spring had not officially begun, the temperature in Tiannan City had begun to rise significantly. Especially when the sun came out, the sky was clear and the sun was shining brightly. There were girls in short skirts and stockings everywhere on the street, making people feel as if the warm spring midsummer had arrived early. It was even more so on the pedestrian street of Tiannan City. The street was full of tourists, rubbing shoulders. Led by Su Chan, Ling Yu, and the little foxes arrived early at the Desanxian store. Because of the many trivial matters before, Li Yundong hadn't paid attention to the store for many days. Especially in the past 2 days, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and the others had been busy raising money, so they couldn't spare any attention. But after all, the Desanxian store was rented in a prime location. If it was open 1 day less, it would make less money. At Li Yundong's request, Su Chan took the little foxes to the store and prepared to take over the tea shop business again. Before coming here, Su Chan didn't want to care about these things anymore, especially because she was really scared by what had happened last time. She was afraid that she would cause another black shop incident and cause great trouble for Li Yundong. However, Li Yundong smiled mysteriously and told the little girl that he had found a perfect partner for Su Chan, who could help her manage the Desanxian. The tea shop was not as good as restaurants, hotels, or even coffee shops and other leisure places. In addition, the Desanxian was open for a few days, so the customer flow had been very unstable. Some high-ranking officials and nobles who wanted to come to support them had lost their temper. 2 out of 3 times they came, they were rejected. What could they do? They also wanted to save face. Especially some guests who wanted to drink some high-end tea saw that the Desanxian was closed every now and then, so they had to go to Zhao's tea house next door to drink tea. As a result, the business of Desanxian became colder and colder. The little girl and the little foxes were like a group of idle girls. They sat in a semicircle at the tea tables around the hall, doing their own things in boredom. Who could it be? Su Chan rested her chin on her hand and sat at the tea table in the hall in boredom, looking at the flow of people outside. What do you mean? Who is it? Ling Yu curiously came over and asked. Su Chan played with her braid with one hand and sighed. Yundong found me a helper. Ling Yu became more and more curious. She said, Su Chan, isn't your relationship with the leader very good? Why is he still stuffing people around you? What the 2 of you said yesterday moved me to tears. Su Chan rolled her eyes at Ling Yu and snorted, what do you know? It's precisely because we have a good relationship that I want to find helpers for me. Am I supposed to rely on you guys? You guys are more troublemakers than me. If we rely on you, the Desanxian will probably close down. The little foxes also came over and said, Shiji Su-chan, what you said is wrong. How did we cause trouble? That's right, that's right. You were the one who took the lead every time. Su-chan pounded the table and stood up. She glared at him and said angrily, Look, what are you talking about? If the guests see us making such a ruckus, will they still come? Just as she finished speaking, she saw two tall and slender girls, dressed fashionably and youthful-looking, walk in. Ling Yu immediately clapped her hands and laughed. Guests are coming. Before Su-chan could turn her head, she urged the little foxes, hurry up and greet the guests. Don't just sit there like a fool. But as soon as she finished speaking, one of the little foxes suddenly pointed at one of the girls and said strangely, Hey, you look so familiar. Su-chan turned her head and saw two girls standing in front of her. Even though they were wearing cartoon t-shirts, they couldn't hide their magnificent breasts. The other girl had a slim figure and a round face. She looked quite sweet. Who else could it be but Ching Cheng and Feng Na? Su-chan thought. Su-chan was pleasantly surprised. It's you guys? Why are you here? Come in and have a seat. Please. Are you here to drink tea? Feng Na laughed and said, Didn't Li Yundong tell you? He called me this morning and asked me to come to the shop. Ah. Su-chan exclaimed in realization. So it's you. The little girl giggled and said, I was wondering why he was so secretive. It turns out that he asked an acquaintance to help. Ching Cheng, who was standing to one side, waved at Su-chan, as if she had been left out. She said angrily, I'm here too. Su-chan walked over with a smile, took their hands, and said, I'm relieved that you're here. Ching Cheng asked curiously, Su-chan, aren't you afraid that the two of us will make trouble for you? Su-chan looked at Ling Yu and the little foxes and giggled. Anyway, they can't be more troublesome than us, hee hee. The little girl turned around and smiled at Feng Na. Big sister Feng Na, now that you're here, I can leave everything in the store to you. Anyway, I don't know anything, so you can just go ahead and do it yourself. Feng Na smiled and said politely, Su-chan, you're too polite. I'm just a small worker, and you're the boss. You can tell me what to do. Su-chan shook her head and said, No, there are many things I don't understand. In the past, I pretended to understand. As a result, I caused a lot of trouble and caused a lot of trouble for Yundong. I don't want to cause any more trouble, so. Sister Feng Na, please help me. As she said this, she took Feng Na's hand and shook it gently. Feng Na saw that Su-chan's words were sincere and polite, especially her pitiful appearance. Even if she wanted to refuse her, she couldn't. Even if Feng Na secretly liked Li Yundong, when faced with a rival in love like Su-chan, she couldn't hate him no matter how hard she tried. Feng Na sighed in her heart, smiled slightly, and said, I see. Leave it to me. Although Feng Na did not major in management, she had her own unique understanding of operation and management. She quickly took out a prepared plan from her small bag, which clearly delineated the position setting, the hierarchical system, the salary distribution of each employee, the reward and punishment system, and the scope of work in the tea house. It was clearly and orderly. Soon, after these were circulated, the little foxes finally understood that they were about to get rid of the previous chaotic management situation. In the past, when a customer came, they would swarm up, causing the customer to be scared away. It seemed that the days when there were no customers and when there were a lot of customers, they would be in a mess. It seemed that they would never return. Seeing that Feng Na was managing all this in an orderly manner, Su-chan sighed in her heart, Yundong is really amazing. He really knows how to make the best use of people and things. Everyone around him is so amazing. While the little girl was sighing with emotion, she suddenly heard an old man's hearty laughter coming from the door. Oh, it's finally open. It's not easy. Su-chan, Feng Na, and the others turned their heads and saw Shen Wankai standing at the door. He was wearing a gray tang suit and looking at them with a smile. Su Chan naturally knew Shen Wankai. She stood up curiously and said with a smile, "Mr. Shen, why are you here?" Shen Wankai walked in with a smile and said, "I've wanted to come for a long time, but since your Desanxian opened for business on the first day, why didn't you open it again?" Su Chan smiled embarrassedly and said, "Actually, it's open, but it's always been closed intermittently." Shen Wankai looked around the shop with a smile and said casually, "Really? Every time I come, I get a big bowl of cold soup. I think this Desanxian should be changed into a porridge shop." Fong Na had also seen Shen Wankai at the opening ceremony of Desanxian. She knew that this person's background was quite powerful, so she didn't dare to be careless. She stepped forward and said with a smile, "Mr. Shen, you're so funny. Please sit down. What tea would you like to drink? I'll make it for you right away." Shen Wankai seemed to have an ulterior motive. After looking around, he asked, "What's wrong? Young Master Li and Zi Yuan Immortal are not here?" Su Chan smiled and said, "They're busy. They don't have time to come to the shop." Shen Wankai asked curiously, "What are they busy with?" Su Chan thought for a moment and said, "Actually, I'm not busy. I'm just busy." Seeing that she was unwilling to speak frankly, Shen Wankai replied with an "oh," and didn't ask any more questions. For Shen Wankai, he had always wanted to be apprenticed to Li Yundong and learn the art of health cultivation. Even if he couldn't live forever, it would still be good to live for 100 years. Especially after seeing Li Yundong's divine skill last time, he regarded Li Yundong as an omnipotent celestial being in his heart. However, Li Yundong refused to accept his apprenticeship. He kept hinting that he had to spend all of his family's wealth and wife before he could be apprenticed to cultivate. However, he had such a large family and such a huge foundation. How could he just let it go? Shen Wankai had been working hard in the business world for many years, and his character had been honed to be indomitable. Naturally, he was not a person who would give up easily. Seeing that Li Yundong did not seem to be a greedy person, he began to think about a way to save the country in a roundabout way. At first, he aimed at Desanxian. He thought that since Li Yundong had opened Desanxian with great fanfare, he must have wanted to make money. Even if he didn't want to make money, he also hoped that his business could be prosperous, right? After all, no one wanted to open a tea shop in this golden area where every inch of land was worth an inch of gold and lose money every day, right? No matter how rich he was, he couldn't do this. As long as he hoped that the business of this shop would be good, he would be able to support this shop. At that time, Li Yundong would have to accept this favor even if he didn't want to. But Shen Wankai had been here for several days before, and he had been rejected. They didn't open the door at all. This made Shen Wankai's judgment seriously shaken. He thought to himself, could it be that he opened this tea shop just for fun? Does he care about business at all? But today, Shen Wankai immediately knew that his speculation was right. Li Yundong must care a lot about the business of this Desanxian. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sent his favorite girlfriend to the shop. Although Shen Wankai didn't see Li Yundong and Zi Yuan, who he wanted to see the most, he sat down calmly. After ordering a cup of tea at random, he leisurely drank the Longjing tea that Su Chan had made for him. At first, the little foxes could still take care of him carefully, but gradually they became a little bored and began to whisper to each other. Shen Wankai was also very determined. He sat there for a full 2 hours. This kind of thing was simply inexplicable in the eyes of others, but in Shen Wankai's eyes, it was a matter of course. When he was doing business in the past, he had relied on this unswerving and persevering spirit to create many opportunities. The reason why Shen Wankai didn't leave was that he wanted to have more contact with them, talk more, and hear more from them. Moreover, based on his understanding of women, especially young girls, when they gathered together in groups of 3 or 5, it would be a waste of their talent if they didn't gossip about their daily lives. As long as they talked, Shen Wankai would never believe that he wouldn't benefit from the topics they talked about. Sure enough, the little foxes couldn't help but start talking about all kinds of gossip. At first, the little foxes were still talking about entertainment news and soap operas on TV, and Shen Wankai was drowsy. But when he suddenly heard a sentence, he suddenly shivered and listened carefully without any drowsiness. Chapter 606. Shen Wankai pricked up his ears and heard Ling Yu and the little foxes whispering about how Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, and the others were raising money. Go to the internet. 7KOM. Hey, do you think Leader will be able to bid for the Medicine King tripod? I don't know. I'm very curious about which sect will cooperate with Leader. Yes, the cultivation world seems to be full of hostile sections. Which sect is willing to cooperate with us? Isn't the Chuanjin Dragon sect on good terms with us? Bah, that's because they are good at pretending. Look at what happened at the last Taoist assembly. Didn't that Du Fei also hide far away? That's not true. They are big sects, so they naturally have more concerns. Do you think it's a child's play? TSK, even if they can cooperate, they may not be able to bid for it. How many sects are coveting the Medicine King tripod? Even I want a Renyuan Jin Dan. Yes, it would be great if Leader could get the Medicine King tripod. I don't dare to hope for the Dun Jin Dan. When the time comes, everyone will get one Renyuan Jin Dan, hee hee. The little fox who spoke last made everyone laugh, but they soon found that Shen Wankai was looking at them with twinkling eyes. Ling Yu's expression suddenly became serious, and she lowered her voice and said, "Stop talking. Don't let outsiders hear these things. Be careful of causing trouble again." The little foxes stuck out their tongues one after another and dispersed. Chen Wankai was eavesdropping. Although he didn't hear all of the conversation, he heard a lot of it intermittently. Chen Wankai thought to himself, strange, who is the leader they are talking about? Judging from the situation last time, it seems to be young Master Li. Hey, what era is this? You still call him leader? Shen Wankai was subconsciously laughing in his heart, but soon he saw that when Feng Na was busy wiping the table, she accidentally knocked over a plate, and the teacup and teapot on the plate suddenly fell to the ground. Su Chan, who was standing to the side, only glanced at them from the corner of her eye. She immediately bent down and bent her body into a graceful arch. Her slender hands gently grabbed the teacup and teapot in her hands. Su Chan's move was beautiful and elegant, inadvertently showing her amazing reflexes and skills that were different from ordinary people. Chen Wansai's heart suddenly trembled. He suddenly remembered that when he had participated in the opening of the Desanxian tea shop, these little foxes had all shown amazing skills. Moreover, Li Yundong's divine skills were amazing. He really couldn't be judged by secular standards. Chen Wankai thought to himself, could it be that this young Master Li is not only an immortal, but also the leader of a sect like Wudang and Shaolin? Chen Wankai was puzzled and wanted to find out what was going on. However, he was an experienced and knowledgeable veteran, so he didn't dare to take the initiative to ask Su Chan and the others. He was afraid that he would offend them and make them unhappy, thus cutting off his path to immortality. It seems that there won't be any results if I stay here any longer. I heard from them that young Master Li is going to participate in an auction to bid for a Medicine King tripod or something. I don't know what it is. But if I can bid for it, I'll give it to young Master Li. I think he will be grateful to me, right? Chen Wankai thought for a moment and came up with an idea. He stood up, said hello to Su Chan, Feng Na, and the others with a smile, and then went on his own. After returning to his home, Chen Wankai pressed a button in front of his desk and called his personal secretary. Chen Wansai's personal secretary was an ordinary-looking man named Su Weikong. He wore a pair of gold-rimmed glasses on his face and looked very gentle. After Su Weikong walked to Chen Wansai's room, he bowed respectfully and said, "Mr. Shen, what can I do for you?" Chen Wankai crossed his arms over his chest. After pondering for a while, he said, "Go and check if any auction houses have sent me a letter recently. Before every large-scale auction, the major auction houses would try their best to hype up and attract more attention to each auction, so that the auction items could be sold at a higher price and earn more benefits. However, for a business giant like Chen Wankai, who was interested in antiques, calligraphy and paintings and was also a rich businessman, there was no need to pay attention to these news at all. People like him were the top VIPs of the major auction houses. As long as there was an important auction, they would be invited to participate in a VIP letter in advance. After hearing Chen Wansai's words, Su Weikong immediately laughed and said, "There's no need to check, Mr. Shen. I just saw it this morning. There are 2 invitations from the auction houses. One is a letter from the Jiada auction house in China, and the other, well, it's a letter from the Tianai auction house in Jiangsu." Chen Wankai nodded and asked, "Show me both of them." Su Weikong bowed and left respectfully. After a while, he held a folder in his hand, took out 2 beautiful invitations, and handed them to Chen Wankai with both hands. Chen Wankai took it and looked at it. He only glanced at Jiada's letter and threw it aside. As for the other one, he suddenly narrowed his eyes and laughed. The letter was accompanied by various pictures and materials of antiques and cultural relics that were about to be auctioned. Among them, a 3-legged purple gold cauldron was the most conspicuous. A row of big words was clearly marked on the top of the picture: "The antique world is shocked to discover the alchemy cauldron used by Sun Simiao, the medicine king of the Tang dynasty." Chen Wankai sneered and said, "The alchemy cauldron of Sun Simiao, the medicine king of the Tang dynasty? Are you kidding me? If such a thing is real, it would be a national treasure. How could it be auctioned?" Su Weikong whispered, "It said that it was discovered by a local villager in Mount Huangshan. It was hyped up in the news a while ago." Chen Wankai glanced at him and didn't say anything. He carefully read the information of the Medicine King tripod and fell into deep thought for a moment. He thought to himself, "This auction will be held in 2 days. I wonder if young Master Li has already applied for the auction?" Thinking of this, Chen Wankai turned his head and said to Su Weikong, "Go to the Tianai auction house and find out who the bidders are." Su Weikong hesitated for a moment and said, "This should be a trade secret, right? They won't disclose it, will they?" Chen Wankai sneered disdainfully and said, "Call them and tell them that I asked. Ask them to send a copy of the information. See if they will give it to you." Su Weikong nodded and walked out. After about 10 minutes, he came in with a few documents with a smile and said, "Mr. Shen, they have faxed the information of the bidders, but these are the ones who have applied for the qualifications of the bidders. There may not be any information for those who apply in the next 2 days." Chen Wankai took the information and glanced at it. Sure enough, he saw the names of Li Yundong and Zi Yuan on it. However, this time, it was in the name of Zi Yuan, and in the name of the Linggong sect of Zhini school. Li Yundong's name was after Zi Yuan's, and Zhou Qin's name was behind Li Yundong's. Chen Wansai's expression suddenly froze. He thought to himself, the eldest daughter of the Zhou family also participated in the bidding? With the strength of her family, it's impossible for her to fail. But Chen Wankai soon came to his senses. He thought to himself, by the way, it must be that Zhou Qin doesn't want to cause any trouble for Zhou Kachang, so she didn't use the connections and power of the Zhou family. Hey, this is a good opportunity. If young Master Li doesn't succeed in the bidding, and I succeed in the bidding, I will give this Medicine King tripod to young Master Li. That will be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. I will win the favor of young Master Li and flatter the daughter of the Zhou family. Ha, this is a good deal, absolutely a good deal. Since ancient times, on the land of China, there was nothing that could make people rich more than the collusion between officials and businessmen. If he could make a connection with the Zhou clan and learn young Master Li's divine skills, it would be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. It was a matter of small capital and great profits. Chen Wankai laughed proudly. Su Weikong, who was beside him, asked, "Mr. Shen, what are you laughing at?" Chen Wankai chuckled and did not answer his question. He just handed over the information sheet in his hand and said, Go and find out the background of these people. Find out the companies or consortiums behind them. Find them out for me. Do you hear me? Su Weikong's heart skipped a beat. He knew that old Master Shen had always been an extremely meticulous person. He would never make a false move. It was obvious that old Master Shen was going to take action against the auction. Su Weikong took the order and went down. About 2 hours later, he came in with a stack of information about the thickness of a pinky finger. Mr. Shen, it's all here, but... Chen Wankai put on his presbyopic glasses, carefully flipped through the information, and said casually, but what? Su Weikong smiled and said, but it's very strange that there are many companies and consortiums with religious backgrounds. Among them are several famous domestic pharmaceutical groups and traditional Chinese medicine chain organizations, and even several Taoist temples and temples. Chen Wankai raised his head in surprise. What? Are you sure you didn't make a mistake? Religious people? Which religious people? Su Weikong said with a smile, most of them are Taoists and Buddhists. 2/3 of the bidders are from these two sides. Shen Wankai was in a state of bewilderment. When he lowered his head to look at the information, he clearly saw the name, Chuanjin Longmen Company, Limited. He immediately laughed and said, Jinren Du is also unwilling to be left out. I see, it seems that there is indeed something wrong with this Medicine King tripod. Chen Wansai's lips curled into a smile of interest. He did not take these opponents seriously. Based on his understanding of the strength of these consortiums and companies, they were unable to pose a threat or snipe at him. But when Chen Wankai suddenly saw a page of information, he was stunned and blurted out, why are there Japanese people? Why is there so little information about them? Su Weikong glanced at the information and said, yes, Mr. Shen. This Zhu family consortium doesn't seem to have a big background, so... Chen Wankai immediately threw the information on the table and said angrily, bastard, only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you win 100 battles. Hurry up and find out. In addition, try your best to find out all the company's markets and the private liquidity that can be used at any time. The more detailed and accurate, the better. Su Weikong bowed in shame and retreated. Shen Wankai was alone in the room. His eyes flickered as he looked at the messy information on the table. Almost every piece of information introduced the companies and consortiums behind the current cultivation sections. Although Shen Wankai did not know much about the cultivation world, and he did not even know that there was a cultivation world around him, he suddenly felt that he seemed to have accidentally touched a huge and secret world with his keen sense of touch as a businessman. Chen Wankai slowly moved his eyes away from the information and looked at the page of the Medicine King tripod on the letter. He couldn't help but murmur softly, so many people. Are they all here for this thing? What the hell is this? What Chen Wankai didn't know was that because of this Medicine King tripod, the Chinese cultivation world, and even the Japanese cultivation world, was about to set off a terrible, and earth-shaking wave. Chapter 607. The auction of the Medicine King tripod soon began. To Li Yindong's surprise, although the Medicine King tripod was an antique cultural relic, found in Huangshan City, Anhui Province, the auction was held in Dongwu City. Go to see. In order to hold this grand auction, Tianai Auction House gave up its own company's auction venue and set up the auction venue in a 5-star hotel in Dongwu City. Li Yundong took Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin to Dongwu City again. Women were a man's best business cards. Most of the time, on certain occasions, the success of a man depended on what kind of women he had with him. In today's China, where the luxury market was constantly heating up, most of the time, an auction held by an auction house was not only a grand event for auction lovers, but also a place for rich people and big shots to spend a lot of money and compete for beauty. In this kind of place, beautiful women were naturally indispensable. As soon as he arrived at the entrance of the hotel, Li Yundong saw all kinds of famous luxury cars appearing at the entrance of the hotel in an endless stream. Luxurious and noble businessmen and beautiful women got out of them one after another. These beautiful women wore jeweled necklaces around their necks and huge gem earrings in their ears. Each of them was rich and enchanting, attracting the attention of many people. But when Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin arrived, everyone's eyes were immediately attracted by the three of them. Su Chan was wearing a fiery red classical dress. The hem of the dress was piled up on the ground like a cloud, like a bright cloud of fire. As soon as the little girl moved, it seemed that there was a cloud following her. She was wearing a fur shawl on her shoulders, and her whole person looked noble, enchanting, and beautiful. Zi Yuan was still wearing a rather ordinary snow-white dress. However, even though she was wearing such an ordinary dress, it made people feel as if she was wearing a seamless heavenly robe. Every inch of her clothes seemed to come from the clouds in the sky. She was like a fairy who had fallen from the clouds to the mortal world. Her entire body did not carry a trace of the mortal world's aura. Zhou Qin was wearing a purple cheongsam. She was calm and elegant by nature, and she came from a rich family. Her every move revealed a unique aura of a superior. Her beautiful eyes revealed a cold and arrogant aura of disdain for all living beings. Only when her eyes fell on Li Yundong did her eyes become extremely soft and full of admiration. As soon as Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin appeared, they immediately captured the brilliance of almost all the beauties in the venue. For a moment, everyone present stared at them with their eyes wide open, as if they couldn't believe that there could be three such stunning beauties in the world at the same time. Moreover, Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin each had their own beauty and temperament. These men looked at Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin greedily and enviously. They couldn't help sighing in their hearts, what kind of man is worthy of such a woman? While they were sighing with emotion, they saw Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin surrounded by a young boy. This boy was wearing a hand-sewn dark red tang suit and a pair of black cloth shoes. His eyes were soft, and there seemed to be a smile at the corner of his mouth. When he looked around, his expression was indifferent, as if he had seen all the vicissitudes of the world. He was not old, but he gave people a sense of maturity, which made people marvel. This boy was Li Yundong. He looked at Su Chan with a smile and said, "Chaner, do you remember the first time we came to the hotel?" Su Chan turned her head to look at him and said with a smile, "I remember. I was so nervous that I didn't know where to put my hands." Li Yundong smiled and said with some emotion, "Yes, it feels like many years have passed. But in fact, less than half a year has passed." She stealthily tugged at his hand and playfully hooked her finger around his palm. Then, she gave him a sweet smile. Although Zhou Qin often went to various places of the upper class, this was the first time she had participated in such a special auction. She looked around curiously and couldn't help sighing. There are so many people. Are they all here to participate in the auction? Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said, "There are many acquaintances." Li Yundong took a look and saw that there were indeed many cultivators from the cultivation sects that he had seen at the Taoist assembly. Among them, Zhang Kongyun, Zhang Lufang, Zhang Ling, Zhou Ping, and others of the Zhengyi school were mixed in. However, this time, they were not wearing Taoist robes. Instead, they were wearing neat suits or silk cheongsams with tassels like luster. Even Zhang Kongyun, who didn't care about his image, was wearing a grey tang suit. He was playing with a folding ink fan in one hand and looking at the ink painting on the fan alone. Zhou Ping and Zhang Ling also saw Li Yundong. The two of them snorted and quickly turned their faces away, showing great hostility. At this time, Su Chan whispered to Li Yundong, "Yundong, where's Zhenrendu? Why hasn't he come yet?" Li Yundong looked around and didn't see anyone from the Chuanjin Dragon sect. Instead, he found that several cultivators from the Qingqing sect were glaring at him, as if they wanted to tear him into pieces in the next second. These guys, why do they seem to have a deep hatred for me? Li Yundong felt strange, but he didn't take it seriously. Just as he was looking back and forth, there was another exclamation behind him. Li Yundong looked back and saw a woman in a red dress with black hair and a blonde girl in a formal suit walking into the hotel lobby. These two women were Ao Wushuang and Chris. Although she was wearing the same long red dress as Su Chan, her long dress gave people a mature and beautiful feeling, unlike Su Chan's, which exuded a pure and pleasant aura of a young girl. Chris' suit perfectly outlined her sexy figure and amazing exquisite curves. When Li Yundong saw the two of them, he immediately smiled and said, "You're here?" Because Ao Wushuang and Chris had also invested in the auction, Li Yundong had specially invited them to come with him. However, Chris didn't know how to fly, so Ao Wushuang took her all the way here, while Li Yundong took Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin to go first. It was obvious that Chris was not used to this kind of high-altitude flight. Her originally very white skin looked even paler at this time. Her legs were trembling a little. She forced a smile at Li Yundong and said, "Can I take a plane next time?" Su Chan burst into laughter and said, "You want to learn cultivation with this kind of person? This is the first time I've heard of someone who can fly but wants to take a plane." Chris bit her lip and didn't say anything more. Li Yundong also helped her out with a smile and said, "Let's go. Let's go into the auction house." Under everyone's gaze, they arrived at the auction house on the 19th floor. As soon as they entered, Li Yundong found that there were already many people sitting there, including many disciples of Buddhist sections. Compared with some cultivators of Taoist sects, these monks were much more generous. Most of them were wearing yellow monk robes, and their bald heads were particularly eye-catching in the crowd. Zhou Qin took a careful look at the scene. She suddenly whispered to Li Yundong, "Master, people from the Shaolin Temple are also here." Li Yundong asked curiously, "People from the Shaolin Temple are also here? Are they also interested in the Medicine King tripod? It can't be, right?" Zhou Qin shook her head. "I don't know about that. I don't know if they are here for the Medicine King tripod." Chris, who knew a lot about China, asked curiously, "Shaolin Temple? Is the Shaolin Temple also a cultivation sect? Isn't this place for practicing martial arts?" Zhou Qin laughed and said, "It's hard for me to explain this to you, but Master knows. Let him tell you." Li Yundong was also looking around. As he looked, he said, "The Shaolin Temple is the same as Wudang Mountain. It is both a martial arts sect and a cultivation sect. Although in martial arts, one belongs to the external sect and the other belongs to the internal sect. But in the cultivation world, the direction of cultivation of the two is quite similar, and they both belong to the Danwu sect." "Danwu sect?" Chris asked with a confused look on her face. Li Yundong explained with a smile, "Well, it's a cultivation sect that uses alchemy to enter the Tao and martial arts. They don't have much need for and dependence on powerful magical weapons. Their main means of fighting are fighting moves supported by Jinqi of Niden." When Zhou Qin heard this, she couldn't help but ask curiously, "Master, if you have a powerful magical weapon but don't use it, won't you suffer a big loss in a fight?" Li Yundong shook his head with a smile. "That's not necessarily true. Zhang Sanfeng was a great master of the Danwu sect. Have you ever heard of him losing in a fight? The fighting methods of the Danwu sect are extremely fierce and flexible. Moreover, they have a unique secret method that can resist magic and powerful magical weapons. They can't be underestimated. If you look down on them, you'll be the one to suffer." Zhou Qin said with a worried expression, "Then won't we have another strong opponent in this auction? The Shaolin Temple is very rich." At this time, Ziyuan laughed. "That's not necessarily true. They may not be here to rob the Medicine King tripod." Ao Wushuang, who had been silent all this time, suddenly said, "In fact, we don't have to snatch the Medicine King tripod. As long as we can ensure that the Medicine King tripod is not taken away by the enemy, it will be fine. If it doesn't work, we can cooperate with Du Fei of the Chuanjin Dragon sect. We can disturb the mood and judgment of the bidders and let Du Fei ambush in the dark." Li Yundong nodded and said with a smile, Senior Ao Wushuang is right. They were sitting in a corner of the auction house and talking in a low voice. At this time, there were more and more people in the auction house, and many people sat in their seats one after another. Li Yundong and Zi Yuan had been staring at the bidders who had come in, secretly calculating the cultivation sects present. When the 13th cultivation sect appeared, Du Fei of the Chuanjin Dragon sect finally appeared in the field with Wei Qing. Du Fei looked around at the door. After meeting Li Yundong's eyes, an imperceptible smile quickly appeared at the corner of his mouth. Then, he quietly sat in another corner with Wei Qing, far away from Li Yundong. When Li Yundong and the others saw Du Fei appear, they all breathed a sigh of relief in their hearts. The little girl patted her chest and said very sweetly, "Fortunately, Jinren Du didn't stand us up." Li Yundong smiled and was about to speak, but his eyes inadvertently swept to the door and he was surprised to see that Shen Wankai had also appeared on the spot. Li Yundong said in surprise, "Shen Wankai? He's here too." His exclamation made Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, Su Chan, Ao Wushuang, and Chris all look at Shen Wankai curiously. Ao Wushuang only took a glance at him and then withdrew her gaze indifferently. She didn't take this rich man seriously at all. Chris didn't know the origin of this old man, so she just looked at him blankly and then withdrew her gaze. Zi Yuan and Su Chan were puzzled, as if they didn't understand why Shen Wankai had come to get involved in this mess. Only Zhou Qin laughed and said, "Master, Shen Wankai is a very cultured person. Think about it, last time he participated in the Tea Culture and Art Challenge, why can't he participate in this kind of antique auction? He is very rich. He is a VIP client of major auction houses and is also a well-known domestic antique speculator." Li Yundong smiled and said, "I see. I understand." Su Chan looked at Shen Wankai and suddenly said with some excitement, "Yundong, if Mr. Shen can help us buy the Medicine King tripod, that would be great." Li Yundong didn't say anything, but just smiled. Seeing that Li Yundong didn't speak, Su Chan was anxious to persuade him, but as soon as she opened her mouth, she saw two more people coming in from the door. As soon as Ao Wushuang saw these two people, her face immediately darkened. Her whole body seemed to be emitting a bone-chilling aura, and she said in a cold voice, "Why are they here?" Li Yundong looked at the two of them and asked curiously, "Who are they?" Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "Saionji Tsunekatsu and Tuki of Jinyan Tantrism are the two Japanese people I told you about before." Li Yundong suddenly frowned and looked at the two Japanese with flickering eyes. He saw that the two Japanese had sharp eyes and looked down at the crowd with arrogant expressions. There was a firm momentum between their eyebrows that was determined to win. He murmured in a low voice, "They don't come with good intentions." Chapter 608. Although the arrival of Saionji Tsunekatsu did not make the other bidders feel a trace of vigilance, Li Yundong subconsciously had an ominous premonition. Go to the internet. 7KOM. Book_bar. He seemed to have vaguely predicted something, but these things were only vague and hazy in the depths of his mind. As for what it was exactly, he couldn't quite put his finger on it. These two guys. Are they here for the Medicine King tripod? Li Yundong frowned and said in a deep voice. Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "Is there anything else that attracted them here?" Su Chan asked curiously, "How did they know?" Zi Yuan looked at Saionji Tsunekatsu and Tuki warily. She said softly, "Maybe they learned about it from the news." The Medicine King tripod is a famous powerful magical weapon in the cultivation world. It's normal for the Japanese to be jealous and want to take it for themselves. Zhou Qin and Su Chan said angrily at the same time, "Damn it." Zhou Qin said angrily, "Can't these Japanese do something good?" Su Chan also said angrily, "How can the national treasure fall into the hands of the Japanese?" "Yundong, you must." While the little girl was talking, she suddenly saw a hand reach out from behind her. A surprised voice said, "Hello, Miss Su Chan, I see you again." Su Chan was stunned for a moment. She looked at the hand that was reaching out from beside her and couldn't help looking back. She saw a middle-aged man smiling at her with a face full of surprise. Su Chan felt that this person was very familiar. It seemed that she had seen him somewhere before, but she couldn't remember for a while. At this time, Li Yundong also turned his head and saw that the middle-aged man in front of him was Rong Guofa, who had tried to buy Su Chan with money at the gate of the amusement park. Su Chan didn't take Rong Guofa to heart, but Li Yundong remembered him unforgettably. He was stunned for a moment. At this time, Rong Guofa also looked at him. They were stunned at the same time and blurted out, "It's you?" If it had been in the past, Li Yundong might have taken the initiative to go forward and humiliate Rong Guofa, but Li Yundong was no longer the young boy he used to be. He just smiled slightly, nodded to Rong Guofa, and said meaningfully, "The world is really small." As soon as Rong Guofa saw Li Yundong, he remembered what Su Chan had once said to him, "You must remember his name. His name is Li Yundong, and he is my partner. Although he is just a nobody now, I promise you that in less than 2 years, his name will shake the world. At that time, what you can do, he can do it effortlessly, but what he can do, you can never do." This Li Yundong? Had he made a name for himself? Rong Guofa looked Li Yundong up and down, but there was nothing special about the clothes he was wearing. However, the women around him were really beautiful. Each of them was a stunning beauty, and their temperaments and appearances were different. For a moment, Rong Guofa was dazzled. Seeing Li Yundong greet him politely, Rong Guofa nodded at him in a reserved manner and smiled, but in his heart, he thought, "This poor boy is really good. I really don't know what's so great about him." Humph. Rong Guofa hadn't expected to meet Su Chan again. He even ignored the fact that he had a female companion beside him and took the initiative to say to Su Chan, "Miss Su Chan, I didn't expect to see you here again. It's really a small world." At this time, Su Chan also remembered who Rong Guofa was. She looked at him with some disgust in her eyes, snorted, and said, "Yes, this world is really small." Rong Guofa was delighted and said with a smile, "Yes, it's really fate." Su Chan saw that Rong Guofa was actually taking advantage of the situation and climbing up to her. She made a face at Rong Guofa and said, "Next time you go somewhere, you must tell me in advance." When Rong Guofa heard this, he was so happy that his bones became a few pounds lighter. He said with a face full of ecstasy, Okay, next time I want to go out, I will definitely inform you first." As he spoke, he didn't forget to look at Li Yundong, his eyes full of provocation and pride. Su Chan said seriously, "Yes, I know where you are going, so I definitely won't go there. In case I run into you." Rong Guofa's smile suddenly froze, and Chris and Zhou Qin couldn't help but burst out laughing. Li Yundong also couldn't help but pat Su Chan on the shoulder and say with a smile, "Well, stop it. Sit down, the auction is about to start." Rong Guofa's girlfriend next to him couldn't stand it anymore. She secretly pinched Rong Guofa's arm and said in a low voice, "Do you think I'm dead?" Rong Guofa smiled awkwardly at her. He finally sat back in his seat and stopped pestering Su Chan, but his eyes kept rolling back and forth between Li Yundong and Su Chan, as if he was calculating something in his heart. Li Yundong, Su Chan, and the others chatted in low voices. After about 10 minutes, the auction, which had almost shocked the entire cultivation world, finally officially began. Li Yundong and Zi Yuan made a private calculation. There were as many as 23 cultivation sects present at the auction this time. The scale was so large that it even far exceeded that of the Taoist assembly. After the host enthusiastically explained the rules of the auction and introduced the items, the first item was displayed on the stand. Li Yundong took a look and saw that there was an exquisite ivory pagoda on the exhibition stand. Although he looked at it from a distance, he could still see that the pagoda was shining with a crystal luster. Obviously, it was not an ordinary item. Soon, the host invited the bidders who wanted to identify and see such an item up close to the stage. Li Yundong saw that many people on the stage had left their seats and walked over to the ivory tower to take a closer look. There were many cultivators from cultivation sects among them. Although Li Yundong had read all the classics in the spirit space, he was the first girl in an auction like this. He asked Zhou Qin curiously, "What is this for?" Zhou Qin explained to Li Yundong in a low voice, "Before every item is auctioned, according to the rules, the bidders will be invited to go up and observe it to make sure that it is genuine and whether it is damaged or not." Only then did Li Yundong understand, but he looked at Du Fei, who had pulled Wei Qing up to observe it, and asked curiously, "Does Zhenren Du also want to buy this ivory tower? Why would he go up to see it?" Zhou Qin shook her head and said, "I don't know. Maybe he likes to collect it." Su Chan, who was standing to one side, asked curiously in a low voice, "Isn't he afraid that he won't have enough money to bid for the Medicine King tripod?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe he has plenty of money, or maybe he has other plans." Li Yundong saw that Zi Yuan's eyes were fixed on the cultivators of the various sects who were watching the auction. Her face was thoughtful, as if she was thinking about something. He couldn't help but ask, "Zi Yuan, what are you thinking?" Zi Yuan came to her senses. She hesitated for a moment and said, "Logically speaking, the information of these items should have been sent to every bidder long ago. We also have them. Moreover, if they are really interested in the items, most of the bidders will go to the auction house in private to see and inspect the goods in private. Therefore, this procedure is actually for those who have no intention of bidding. Many people are just going through the motions. Even if they have seen it before, they just want to go up and see if it has been replaced. Although, for the sake of their own reputation, the auction house is unlikely to do such a thing." Li Yundong asked curiously, "What do you want to say?" Zi Yuan thought for a moment and said, "Since most of us are here for the Medicine King tripod, we definitely won't waste money on these items, so there's no need to look at them, because we definitely won't buy them. But why would these cultivators go to see them?" Li Yundong thought for a moment, then shook his head and said, "I don't know. Maybe they want to kill the rabbit and then collect a basket of grass. And collect a few cultural relics by the way." Zi Yuan couldn't help laughing and shook her head. She said in a low voice, "Li Yundong, think about it. If you and a sect are fighting fiercely in the auction, and a third party suddenly appears, what will you do?" Li Yundong was stunned. "You mean, there may also be cultivation sects secretly joining forces?" Zi Yuan nodded and said, "Generally speaking, a bidder will have two psychological bottom lines. The first is the psychological bottom line determined by the liquidity he has at hand. When the price of the auction exceeds the upper limit of the liquidity he can gather in a short period of time, his heart will be seriously shaken and he will begin to reconsider whether to continue bidding." Zi Yuan looked at the auctioneer on the stage and said in a low voice, "According to the Scottish auction rules of this auction, once the auctioneer calls the hammer 3 times and the bidder has not decided, then no matter how much money he has, he won't be able to buy such goods. At that time, it will be too late for him to regret it." Zhou Qin was also listening carefully. At this time, she also interrupted, "Yes, so bidding is not only about burning money to compete for wealth, but also a kind of competition of courage and intelligence. Sometimes, some bidders will even place shills in the auction house to cooperate with their bidding in order to win." Li Yundong asked curiously, "How?" Zi Yuan said with a smile, "Didn't I just say that a careful bidder will usually have 2 bottom lines in his heart? The first is the upper limit of the liquidity in his hands. If this bottom line is exceeded, it may bring liquidity difficulties to his business and company. Therefore, at this time, he will hesitate for a moment. However, because many buyers will choose to pay off the money in installments after the auction is successful, the first psychological bottom line will give them a relatively minor blow. As long as they quickly calculate the distribution of their liquidity and the distribution of the payment funds, they can quickly make a judgment, to chase the price or to give up." Li Yundong listened attentively and said, "What about the second psychological bottom line?" Zi Yuan continued to speak with confidence and assurance. The second psychological bottom line is relatively vague, but generally, if the actual value of the auction item is far lower than the auction price, then the second psychological bottom line will be broken. In addition, if the auction price far exceeds the financial limit of the bidder, then this psychological bottom line will also be broken. And the limit of this financial limit varies from person to person. Some businessmen are strong. Even if they bid for a sky-high price, they can still turn over the money if they choose to pay in installments. Li Yundong was a little confused. He asked, "But what does the second psychological bottom line you mentioned have to do with the alliance between the sects and the placement of shills?" At this time, Zhou Qin laughed. She said softly, "Master, you don't know this. Sometimes the bidding is decided in an instant, so there is not much space and time left for people to think. Think about it, if I arrange someone to secretly attack you and you call out a price, he immediately calls out the price that is the first bottom line in your heart. What will you think at that time?" Li Yundong was stunned for a moment. "Then I will definitely be stunned subconsciously, and then turn my head to see who is bidding." Zhou Qin laughed and said, "That's right. At this time, if I personally call out a price and then instantly call out the price that is the second bottom line in your heart, what will you think?" Li Yundong suddenly understood. "I understand. Ordinary people generally can't accept such a huge price fluctuation in an instant, so they will be greatly shocked, become afraid of fighting, and then choose to give up." Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong with admiration. "That's right. Moreover, this method of bidding is very secretive, and it's not easy to offend people. Because the party who gives up usually hates the most is not the person who bid the last price and won the item, but the person who messed up the bidding in the beginning." At this time, Zi Yuan also laughed. "Well, in fact, this is a bit like a tactical method in long-distance running. At the beginning, you will target the strongest person on the enemy's side and arrange an opponent to drag you down and constantly consume your physical strength. The other contestant will follow you at a moderate pace until the opponent is almost exhausted by his companions. Then he will suddenly exert his strength, suddenly overtake him, and then leave." Li Yundong looked at the cultivators of the other sects with a strange expression and whispered, "Did they also arrange shills?" Zi Yuan smiled and said, "Can we join hands with the Chuanjin Dragon sect? Why can't they join hands with each other? The most important thing is, all of us hope to exhaust the enemy, but no one is willing to make the first move, because this kind of bidding is like beating drums and passing flowers. Everyone wants this flower to fall into the hands of others at the beginning and consume their funds. But the problem is, because they are not sure who is the secret shill, they definitely don't dare to make a move easily. Otherwise, if they bid a price, no one will bid again. They will be forced to buy it and spend a round of money, which will be a big loss. Or if they bid a few times, it will be bought by those who really want to buy the item. Then it will be meaningless." Li Yundong nodded to himself. He thought for a moment and said, "It would be great if we could mess up the situation and let these guys consume each other in confusion." Zhou Qin smiled and said, "It's not that easy. They are not fools. They won't make a move until they are sure of their identities." Su Chan, who had been listening to the conversation between Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin, suddenly had an idea. She quickly glanced at Rongguofa behind her, as if she had come up with some wicked idea. Her eyes suddenly rolled around, and she whispered a few words to Zhou Qin, who was beside her. Zhou Qin was stunned. At first, her face was full of suspicion, but the more she listened, the brighter her eyes became. She couldn't help but glance at Rongguofa behind her. After listening to Su Chan's words, she gave Su Chan a thumbs up with great admiration and nodded slightly. After getting Zhou Qin's approval, Su Chan immediately laughed, and her eyes narrowed into slits. She shook her head and thought proudly, I just had a brainwave and came up with a good idea that will shock the world and make the gods weep. I'll make the auction a mess so that we can fish in troubled waters." Chapter 609. Soon, all the bidders who had gone to the stage to watch the auction had finished and returned to their seats. Go to the internet. Li Yundong saw these people going up and down, coming and going. Those who went up to the stage to watch were not necessarily interested in buying, while those who looked around below the stage were not necessarily unwilling to buy. Li Yundong couldn't help but smile and whispered to Zi Yuan, "I wonder what will happen later." Zi Yuan smiled and said, "We'll know soon." At this time, Su Chan came over and looked at the ivory Arhat tower with envy. She whispered to Li Yundong, "Yundong, this ivory tower is so beautiful. If it were placed in our house, it would be very beautiful." Although Su Chan's voice was quite low, it was just enough for Rongguogua to hear. When Rongguogua heard this, his heart skipped a beat and he was secretly delighted. Humph, Miss Su Chan likes this kind of ivory tower. Then I'll bid for it and give it to her later. I can win the favor of the beauty and defeat this guy's arrogance. It's killing two birds with one stone. Why not? For Rongguogua, he always believed in one sentence: men don't care about loyalty. Loyalty is because the weight of betrayal is too low. Women don't care about loyalty. Loyalty is because they are not tempted enough. As long as he showed enough sincerity and temptation, he believed that he would be able to get the beauty in his arms in the end. Could it be that he couldn't defeat a young boy? Even if this guy was outstanding now, could he surpass him in half a year's time? Rongguogua thought disdainfully in his heart. Li Yundong didn't know what Rongguogua was thinking. He looked at Su Chan curiously and seemed a little puzzled. According to his understanding of the little girl, she had never been a person who liked luxury. Although she had a fanatical love for food and clothes, she had never shown any interest in these antiques. Li Yundong was about to ask Su Chan, but he saw that she was secretly winking at him. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He knew that the little girl must be up to something, but as for what it was, he couldn't think of it for the time being, so he nodded cooperatively and said with a smile, "You like it? Well, I'll buy it for you later." Rongguogua, who was behind him, sneered when he heard this. He crossed his arms and leaned back, looking like a mantis stalking the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. Li Yundong paid attention to the starting price of the ivory Arhat's mansion guarding pagoda and the minimum price increase each time. He asked curiously, 100,000? It doesn't seem very expensive? Su Chan stuck out her tongue and said exaggeratedly, "Isn't 100,000 expensive? In the past, we couldn't even get 10,000 yuan." Li Yundong laughed. With the help of Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, Chris, and Ao Wushuang, he had raised nearly 50 million yuan. This amount of money was not a lot, but it was not a small amount either. For Li Yundong, it was the first time in his life that he had control of such a large amount of money. This feeling of being a nouveau riche made him feel that the huge amount of money he usually had was just pocket money at this time. Li Yundong pinched the little girl's cheek and said with a smile, "Times have changed." Su Chan held Li Yundong's arm with a smile and smiled sweetly at him. At the same time, she glanced at Rongguogua, who was behind her, intentionally or unintentionally. This glance perfectly displayed Su Chan's unique charm of a girl and the unique charm of a fox. It was like an invisible hand grabbing Rongguogua's heart, making his heart beat violently in an instant. He couldn't help thinking, why is she looking at me like this? Is she looking down on me? This look was full of provocation to Rongguogua, but Su Chan's angry and happy face made people feel that there was a trace of hidden provocation hidden in it. On one hand, Rongguogua felt ashamed and angry, but on the other hand, there was a subconscious expectation. Rongguogua calmed down and made up his mind. He sneered and thought to himself, "I'll let you know what a real rich family is in a moment. Do you think that you can be proud in front of me just because you have some money?" After the auctioneer called out the price, someone quickly raised the price, but to Li Yundong's surprise, the first one to raise the price was from the Shaolin Temple. A bald monk in a monk's robe was raising a sign in the auction house, which was really a different kind of scenery. For a moment, everyone on the scene looked at the monk. The monk had a wide mouth and a flat nose. After raising the sign, he looked at his nose and his heart, as if he had turned a deaf ear to the world around him, like an old monk in meditation. Li Yundong asked curiously, "No? Why did the Shaolin Temple raise the sign? Do they want to buy this ivory Arhat tower?" Zi Yuan smiled and said, "It should be a cover-up. This starting price is really too low. If no one bids again, it will be a big profit." Li Yundong laughed and said, "The auction house won't let anyone buy this thing at such a low price, right?" Zi Yuan nodded and said, "Yes, the auction house will also arrange their own shills to bid. When they feel that the bidding price of such goods is too low, they will bid or raise the price, or when they see that there are no good buyers, they will buy it back themselves to avoid losing money." While the two of them were talking in low voices, they saw another person raise the sign on the other side. It was Du Fei from the Chuanjin Dragon sect. The auctioneer shouted loudly on the stage, 104,000 yuan. Is there any higher price than this? 104,000 yuan. Soon, someone raised the price again, but it was the monk from Mount Wutai. Li Yundong was even more surprised. Why are all the previous bidders from cultivation sects? No way. What are they doing? It doesn't seem right. Zi Yuan was also confused and said in confusion, "I don't know. Logically speaking, it shouldn't be. Could it be that they are trying to consume each other?" Li Yundong said curiously, "Aren't they afraid that they will buy this thing in the end and be consumed?" But just as they were feeling strange, they saw the atmosphere on the scene suddenly become white-hot. The cultivation sects who had been watching on the stage raised their signs one after another to increase the price. In just a short while, the price had been raised to 200,000 yuan. Seeing that the first item was being auctioned so smoothly, the atmosphere suddenly became hot, and his own emotions also became excited. He couldn't help but shout, 200,000 yuan. Is there any higher price than this? 200,000 yuan once, 210,000 yuan. Someone raised the price by 10,000 yuan at once, 210,000 yuan. Is there any higher price than 210,000 yuan? Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, Su Chan, and the others were all dumbfounded at this time. They looked at each other, as if they didn't understand what these cultivation sects were doing at all. Li Yundong said with a strange expression, "Are they all crazy? Why are they fighting for this thing?" Zi Yuan frowned and stared at the ivory Arhat tower. She didn't say a word, as if she was thinking about something quickly. Zhou Qin thought for a while, then said in a low voice, "Master, shall we raise the sign?" Su Chan pulled Li Yundong's arm excitedly and said, Okay, I'll raise it." Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Why are you so excited?" Su Chan made a face at Li Yundong and said, "It's fun. With so many people raising their signs to bid together, it's so fun and lively." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Then you can play, but be careful not to get yourself into trouble later." Su Chan's eyes narrowed into a line as she smiled. She was as proud as a fox that had done something bad. She moved closer to Li Yundong's ear and whispered, don't worry, I promise I will only set fire to people, not to myself." After that, she jumped up, quickly raised the sign, and shouted, 1 million. There was an uproar in the room, and the auctioneer suddenly became excited. Some ordinary businessmen who wanted to buy such a bidding item were stunned by Su Chan's words. Many of them sincerely wanted to buy this ivory Arhat tower, but they were confused by the previous bidding behavior of the various sections. They didn't know whether they really wanted to buy it or just wanted to raise the price. But at this time, Su Chan directly raised the price from 210,000 to 1 million. These businessmen suddenly went crazy. How could there be such a random bidding? Did they know how to bid? Had they ever bid? These businessmen were so angry that they almost wanted to hit the table, but when they turned their heads, they saw an extremely beautiful girl standing there with a sweet smile. Their anger suddenly dissipated a lot. Li Yundong was also shocked by Su Chan's bid. He quickly pulled Su Chan down and said in a low voice, "Hey, are you crazy? 1 million to buy such a thing? If no one raises the price later, what will you do?" Su Chan smiled and said in a low voice, "Don't worry, someone will definitely raise the price." As soon as Su Chan's voice fell, she saw the monk of the Shaolin Temple raise the sign again. The host immediately shouted, 1,002,000, is there any higher bid? 1,002,000 going once. Li Yundong was really stunned at this time. He turned to look at Su Chan and asked curiously, "How do you know that these big monks will raise the sign and bid?" Su Chan also said with a blank face, "I don't know, Before Su Chan could finish her words, a new round of bidding immediately set off in the room. To Li Yundong's great surprise, it was still the cultivation sects who raised the price. What are these guys doing? Li Yundong was dumbfounded, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Why aren't any serious businessmen raising the price? Instead, it's a group of drunkards who are randomly raising the price? At this time, Ziyuan's expression changed. She said with a stern expression, "Li Yundong, you are proficient in all Buddhist magical items. Why don't you use your Jinshi to test this ivory Arhat tower in private and see if there is any reaction?" Li Yundong was stunned for a moment. Soon, he controlled his Jinshi to extend along the ground like invisible tentacles toward the ivory Arhat tower. The Jinshi was invisible and traceless. When Li Yundong controlled his Jinshi to approach the ivory Arhat tower, in an instant, the ivory Arhat tower emitted a dazzling golden light. Many people on the scene suddenly cried out in alarm and stood up in horror. Li Yundong also suddenly widened his eyes and looked at Ziyuan in disbelief. He asked in surprise, "What's going on?" Ziyuan's face was as dark as water. She said in a deep voice, "If I'm not mistaken, this is a powerful magical weapon of Buddhism, the Arhat demon-subduing tower." What? Zhou Qin, Su Chan, and Ao Wushuang were all shocked. Arhat demon-subduing tower? How is this possible? Why would another powerful magical weapon appear at this auction? Chapter 610. For a moment, Zhou Qin and the others couldn't understand why there would be other powerful magical weapons in this auction, which was supposed to be a competition for the Medicine King tripod. The appearance of the Arhat demon-subduing pagoda was like the appearance of a Qing Yao Jin. It immediately disrupted the situation on the field. Everyone began to talk about it, and for a moment, the field was like a boiling pot. Go to the internet. There was a sneer at the corner of Ziyuan's mouth. She kept looking around, as if she was looking for something. She sneered in a low voice and said, "Because someone wants to mess up the situation more than us." Zhou Qin was also an extremely smart person. She quickly reacted, widened her eyes, and said, "Could it be that someone wants to deliberately consume the opponent, so they put a real powerful magical weapon up?" Ziyuan nodded slightly. She turned her face and said to Zhou Qin with a faint smile, "There is only one Medicine King tripod. That is to say, only one sect or at most two sects united together can obtain this supreme Taoist magic weapon for alchemy. It can be said that there are too many monks and too little porridge. But think about it, those who are weaker and can't get the Medicine King tripod. If they realize that they can't get the Medicine King tripod, it seems not bad to turn around and grab another powerful magical weapon, right? At least they didn't go back empty-handed." At this time, Ao Wushuang also sneered again and again. Good means, good strategy. This can not only shake the determination of many weaker cultivation sects, but also consume their funds. Hey, I just don't know who used this method. It's almost as good as Wang Jinyuan's 2 peaches and 3 soldiers. Li Yundong laughed and said, "It's just that killing 10,000 enemies and losing 3,000 soldiers. Aren't they afraid of losing their wives and soldiers?" Chris, who had been silent all this time, turned her head to look at Li Yundong, and then at Su Chan and the others. She didn't understand the situation on the field, but it was the first time she had seen such a hot atmosphere at the beginning of an auction. Not only Chris, but Sayonji Tsunekatsu and Tuki of Jinyan Tantrism were also staring at each other with their mouths agape. Tuki said, Changsheng, what's going on? Sayonji Tsunekatsu sneered and said, the Chinese are crazy. These Chinese people only knew how to fight among themselves. They only knew how to cause internal strife. Humph, to actually use this kind of method. Ignore them. We only want the Medicine King tripod. These are just distractions. They are useful for those who are not determined. Tuki said anxiously, Changsheng Jun, this is the Arhat demon subduing pagoda. This was a supreme-grade Buddhist treasure. It would have been fine if we hadn't seen it, but now that it has appeared in the auction, how could we not fight for it? Sayonji Tsunekatsu's face was gloomy and his eyes were fixed on the Arhat demon-subduing tower, which was shining with golden light on the auction platform. He knew that this magic weapon originated from the Wei, Jin, and Northern Dynasties period in Chinese history. At that time, Emperor Liang Wu, the emperor of the Southern Dynasty, believed in Buddhism and denounced Taoist cultivation sects such as Shushan as demons and evil spirits. He also gathered countless eminent monks and mages to refine this Arhat demon-subduing tower. It was said that this Arhat demon-subduing tower looked ordinary on the outside, but inside it was carved with 999 Arhats. Once this Arhat demon-subduing tower covered a demon ghost, these 999 Arhats would chant scriptures together, trap the demon, and make it impossible for him to move. It would be a lie to say that he was not tempted by such a powerful magical weapon. Sayonji Tsunekatsu gritted his teeth and hesitated for a while. He turned his head and shouted at Tuki in a low voice, Bastard, I am young Xinjiang. Listen to me. Ignore this powerful magical weapon. We only want the Medicine King tripod. Tuki Jun's face was gloomy and he lowered his head helplessly. Yes. Tuki Jun. At this time, the auctioneer on the stage also shouted excitedly, Look, everyone, this is the Ivory Arhat Tower. Now it has shown its spirit. 1,002,000 for one. What are you still hesitating for? 1,002,000 twice, 1 million. Ah, someone is calling a higher price, 1 million, 1 million. Is there a higher price? At this time, the plans of all the cultivation sects were completely disrupted by this Arhat demon-subduing tower. As Zi Yuan had expected, many of the weaker cultivation sects began to be seriously shaken. For a moment, they were wavering. They didn't know whether they should grab this powerful magical weapon in front of them or save money to grab the Medicine King tripod later. Some powerful cultivation sects also wanted to disrupt the situation on the scene. They also raised the price one after another, creating a chaotic scene of driving up the price, which made the weaker cultivation sects more and more hesitant. At this time, Chen Wansai's face was also full of doubts. He looked in the direction of Li Yundong from time to time. Shen Yu and Shen Hui, who had come with him to the auction, also tried to persuade him, Dad, don't you like this kind of evil-suppressing thing the most? Or is it blessed? Don't you want to buy it? Chen Wankai saw that Li Yundong, Su Chan, and the others had been whispering to each other. For a moment, he couldn't figure out what Li Yundong was thinking, so he withdrew his gaze and said lightly, Don't worry, let's wait and see. At this time, the price on the field had been raised to 5 million yuan, but 5 million yuan was still an unimaginably low price for such a demon-subduing Arhat tower. Li Yundong, who had been watching quietly, laughed at this time. He snorted and said in a low voice, No wonder so many people from the cultivation sects went up to see this kind of auction just now. It turns out that they have already felt that something is wrong. Hey, we were too careless. If we had seen this powerful magical weapon earlier, we would have been more prepared. Zi Yuan smiled and comforted him softly, It's useless. They want to play tricks. Moreover, I can be sure that no one from the cultivation sects went to see these auction items in private, because they all came for the Medicine King tripod, so like us, they didn't think of checking other auction items. Li Yundong chuckled and said, It's dark under the light. However, since someone wants to disturb the situation on the field, well, let's cooperate. Li Yundong quickly raised the sign, and the auctioneer suddenly became short of breath. He said in surprise, 10 million, buyer number 43 offered 10 million. Is there any higher price than this? 10 million once. 10 million twice. For a moment, everyone on the field looked at Li Yundong. Zhou Ping, who was sitting in the front row, looked back at Li Yundong. She frowned and said to Zhang Ling, Master, is it Li Yundong who is playing tricks? Zhang Ling sneered and said, I don't know. It doesn't matter who is playing tricks. What's important is that now that things have come to this, we have to find a way to consume the opponent's funds as much as possible, so. Before she could finish her words, she also raised the sign. The auctioneer suddenly took a deep breath and said in surprise, 20 million. Someone has offered 20 million. He had seen a lot of auctioneers and had seen all kinds of fierce auctions, but this was the first time he had seen an auction where the price was so high that it was multiplied by several times. This was too exaggerated. The ordinary businessmen and buyers all looked at Zhang Ling in shock and anger, wanting to see who this person was who did not play according to common sense at all. You can't play like this. You can't raise the price like this. Rongguofa, who had originally wanted to buy this item, was also stunned. The development of the situation was completely beyond his imagination. Although 20 million was not a large amount for him, spending 20 million to buy an ivory Arhat tower to please a beauty? This seems a little too exaggerated. But Rongguofa was hesitating in his heart. At this time, Li Yundong once again joined in the fun and raised the price, and it was 10 million. At this time, the auctioneer was already fanatical as if he had been injected with chicken blood. This item was completely beyond their expectations, and it had actually risen to such a high price. He shouted loudly, 30 million, is there any higher price than this? Rongguofa was also completely shocked. He looked at Li Yundong dumbfounded and thought in his heart, this guy. Is he so rich? Could it be that he's just joking? Or, is this a sky-high price game? Sometimes, in order to make huge profits, the auction house would arrange many shills to raise the price of the auction items on the scene, creating the illusion of a hot atmosphere, thus stimulating some new collectors to buy a collection that was not worth that much at all. This kind of behavior was called a sky-high price game. But Rongguofa looked around and saw that there were all kinds of people on the scene. The most exaggerated thing was that after Li Yundong shouted the price, the people of Shaolin Temple raised their paddles again, and this monk was still unhurriedly adding 2,000 yuan, as if no matter how high the price was, he would add 2,000 yuan to it. It was as if he was a maggot attached to the bone. If this is a sky-high price game, then this method is too clever, isn't it? Rongguofa muttered in a low voice. But soon, Li Yundong raised his paddle again and raised the price to 40 million yuan. At this time, Zhou Qin also whispered to Li Yundong nervously, Master, be careful. Be careful that this game of beating drums and passing flowers will stop in your hands. That will be a big loss. Li Yundong chuckled and said, No, don't worry. Moreover, it's not a loss to buy such a powerful magical weapon for 40 million yuan. Other Taoist sects may not be able to use the powerful magical weapons of Buddhist sects when they buy them back, but for me, I don't have such worries at all. Zhou Qin smiled bitterly and said, You're right, but what about the Medicine King tripod? Li Yundong smiled and said, I mean in case. We still have to fight for the Medicine King tripod. At this time, the atmosphere on the scene was full of gunpowder. Rongguofa's girlfriend, who had come with him, saw that everyone was fighting for it, but Rongguofa, who had been bragging to her about his wealth, was like a hesitant and frightened quail. She couldn't help but pull Rongguofa's hand and whisper, Hey, why don't you bid? Rongguofa whispered, Are you crazy? You want to buy such an ivory Arhat tower for 40 million yuan? His girlfriend said, Do you think everyone here is crazy? Why are they all so eager to bid for it? Moreover, didn't you see the abnormality of this ivory Arhat tower before? It can shine. It's definitely not an ordinary item. Rongguofa laughed angrily. I've seen this kind of method many times. It must be the auction house's trick to please the public. As soon as he finished speaking, Su Chan, who was in front of him, giggled and turned her head. She looked at him contemptuously and snorted. Then, the little girl turned her head and whispered a few words in Li Yundong's ear. Then, she picked up the sign in his hand and held it up again. At this time, Rongguofa only felt that all the blood in his body had rushed up with a buzz and rushed straight to the top of his head. Was there anything in this world more infuriating and irrational than being humiliated by others in front of a stunning beauty whom he had fallen in love with? The answer was, yes. He had been personally humiliated by this stunning beauty in front of other men. Su Chan didn't say a word, but Rongguofa felt as if he had been pierced by countless sharp blades in an instant, and his whole body was covered with cuts and bruises. He suddenly remembered his behavior of showing off his wealth in front of Li Yundong. But at that time, that unknown young man was now riding on his head. What was so great about this upstart? He must be strong in appearance but weak in reality. He must be bluffing. Damn it, I want to expose his pretense. How dare you be so presumptuous in front of me? I've seen this kind of bidding many times, and I'll let you know what real bidding is. Rongguofa was so stimulated by Su Chan's gaze that he trembled all over and instantly lost his mind. He gritted his teeth, stood up, and shouted, 80 million yuan. There was a sudden uproar. I wrote too late last night and didn't finish it. I got up this morning to finish the last point and quickly send it up. This is yesterday's second update. Sorry everyone. Chapter 611. The auctioneer was dumbfounded. It was as if he couldn't believe his ears. An item that had a base price of 100,000 had actually been raised to 80 million. Was there something wrong with his ears, or was this world too crazy? The cultivators of the other sex were also shocked. They looked at Rongguo with their mouths agape. This was the first time they had seen someone raise the price from 40 million to 80 million. This was simply too exaggerated. Rongguo's girlfriend was also frightened by his behavior. She stared at him blankly and couldn't speak for a while. She just gently pulled his sleeve. Watch net. After Rongguo stood up and shouted, he immediately regretted it. As the saying goes, impulsiveness is the devil. Sometimes, when people's emotions come, they really can't stop it. At this time, Zhang Ling of the Jingyi school turned her face and looked at Rongguo coldly. She sneered at Zhou Ping in a low voice and said, "Hey, just now I saw him looking at Li Yundong and the others. Now it seems, it's very likely that he's Li Yundong's shill." Zhou Ping also sneered and said, "You want to raise the price to exhaust us? Then you should also lift it slowly. Why are you lifting it so many times?" Zhang Ling chuckled. 80 million. That's not a small number. Now all the cultivation sects had to make a choice. Should they choose to let someone take away this Arhat demon-subduing tower? Should I conserve my strength? Or should I continue to follow up and eat the demon-subduing Arhat tower myself so that I won't return empty-handed in the future? Zhou Ping also whispered, "The most important thing is that Li Yundong is a Taoist cultivator who can use Buddhist powerful magical weapons. If this powerful magical weapon falls into his hands, it will definitely be like adding wings to a tiger. It would be great if we can ensure that he doesn't get his hands on this magic treasure." Zhang Ling glanced at Rong Guofeng unkindly. Especially when she saw the hidden complacent smiles between Su Chan and Zhou Qin, she became more and more certain in her heart. She said, "It's hard to say. However, it's better if we can spend some of their money." At this moment, she turned her head and looked in a certain direction. She nodded lightly at a plain-looking middle-aged man. The middle-aged man immediately raised the paddle in his hand. The auctioneer immediately shouted, "Someone has offered a higher price. 80 million 2,000. Is there a higher price than this?" However, Rongguo didn't raise the price again. He seemed to have used up all his strength and slowly sat down in his seat, as if he had just been in a sauna. 80 million, he had almost lost it. 80 million, as was almost. Rong Guofeng's heart was pounding, and he couldn't help being afraid. He kept wiping the sweat on his forehead with a handkerchief. As the saying goes, the first burst of energy, the second burst of energy, and the third burst of energy. For a moment, Rong Guofeng didn't want to compete with Li Yundong anymore. He still wanted to buy something. At this moment, Li Yundong and Zi Yuan looked at each other. Zi Yuan nodded slightly and said softly, "This is the bottom line. Don't raise the price anymore." At this time, the game of beating the drums and passing the flowers has reached its limit. If you shout again, it is very likely that you will really fall on your head. Li Yunyang also nodded and smiled. I think so too. Although the Arhat Demon Subduing Tower is a powerful Buddhist magic weapon, it only has a single sealing function. In a fight, its actual effect is far inferior to the fan of 7 treasures. So, I'll buy this magic weapon for 80 million yuan. At this time, the cultivators of all sects and schools seemed to have the same thought. They all stopped raising their paddles, and the real businessmen and buyers were frightened by this kind of madness. For a moment, they all became spectators. No one raised their paddles again. At this time, only the auctioneer was left in the originally lively auction house. He shouted on the stage, 80 million 2000, once. 80 million 2000, twice. At this time, Zhou Ping said anxiously, "Master, why is no one bidding?" Zhang Ling smiled slightly and said to Zhou Ping, "Don't worry, there will definitely be someone else bidding." As soon as she finished speaking, the auctioneer smashed down with his hammer. 80 million 2000, thrice. Sold. Zhang Ling and Zhou Ping were dumbfounded. They looked at each other in dismay, and their hearts were filled with rage. Zhou Ping said in a low voice, "Master, we've been tricked. We've been plotted against." Zhang Ling's original intention was not to rob this powerful magical weapon. From beginning to end, she just wanted to rob the Medicine King tripod. However, she thought that she had discovered Li Jiandong's shill, so she deliberately raised the price again, trying to consume more of Li Jiandong's funds. But she had never expected that this guy would actually give in. She had actually bought this Arhat Demon Subduing Tower. Although this powerful magical weapon was powerful, she couldn't use it after buying it. Bastard, 80 million. Zhang Kongyun, who had been watching coldly from the side, sighed and whispered to his disciple, Zhang Lufang, with a smile, "This is great. She's playing with fire." Zhang Liufang's face was full of worry. "Master, do we have enough money to buy the Medicine King tripod?" Zhang Ling heard their words clearly, and her face turned blue and red. She shouted angrily at Zhang Lufang in a low voice, "Does our Zhini school lack this little money?" Zhang Lufang was so scared that she stuck out her tongue and lowered her head, not daring to speak. Zhang Kongyun said unhappily, "Eldest Shiji, why are you shouting at the younger generation? If you have the ability, go and shout at the one who raised the price." Zhang Ling was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She angrily turned her head and glared at Rong Guofeng, as if she wanted to remember his appearance in her heart. She gritted her teeth and sneered in her heart, "Humph, well done. I'll remember this." Li Yundong saw the expressions of Zhang Ling and the others. He couldn't help laughing and said, "Very well, the Zhini school has been exhausted in advance. Now they've suffered a loss." Zi Yuan smiled and said, "We can't be careless. The Zhini school is rich." Li Yundong suddenly thought of something. He looked around curiously and said in a low voice, "By the way, why didn't I see anyone from the Gazao sect of external alchemy? Logically speaking, the richest sect should be the Gazao sect. Why didn't Wang Jinyuan come? Doesn't he want his powerful magical weapon anymore?" Zhou Qin sneered and said, "Master, he could only grab one Diyuan Jindan and escape. Didn't he think that he would leave this Medicine King tripod behind and cause our sects to kill each other and become enemies? Li Yundong furrowed his brows. Well, it's not impossible. But Li Yundong was about to continue when he saw Su Chan tugging at his arm with all her might. She was smiling at him, as if she was waiting for a reward. Li Yundong asked curiously, "What's wrong? What are you laughing at?" Su Chan laughed so hard that her nose and eyes were gone. She leaned over to Li Yundong's ear and whispered a few words. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing and quickly glanced at Rong Guofeng behind him. He reached out his hand and scratched the tip of Su Chan's nose. He whispered with a smile, "It turns out that this was your idea. I was wondering why he suddenly became crazy." "Good, amazing, you did a good job this time. I'll reward you well when we go home." Li Yundong's last sentence was extremely ambiguous, which made the little girl giggle. She thought of the passion they had when they had kissed before and couldn't help but feel an itch in her heart. She wished she could be intimate with Li Yundong here and now. Li Yundong, Su Chan, and the others were talking and laughing happily. When Zhang Ling saw their relaxed and happy scene, she felt so angry that her heart was bleeding, and she sneered again and again. After the interlude of the ivory Arhat Tower, the next few auction items were not as crazy as before. Some ordinary businessmen and buyers saw that no one was driving up the price again, so they tentatively offered a few rounds of prices, and then hastily made the final decision. After the battle, all the sects seemed to be recuperating, storing energy, and waiting for the real battle. Very quickly, all the auction items were successfully auctioned off. When the last item was taken out, everyone couldn't help but sit up straight. Their eyes lit up as they looked at a purplish gold three-legged cauldron that was surrounded by a faint white mist. The Medicine King tripod. The auctioneer passionately introduced the appraisal and historical background of the Medicine King tripod on the stage, and invited the bidders under the stage to watch it. At this time, none of the cultivators from various sects went up to watch. Instead, some ordinary businessmen and buyers came forward to watch. When they saw the Medicine King tripod surrounded by white mist, they couldn't help sighing and nodding in praise. After looking around on the stage, Rong Guoguo returned to his seat and said to his girlfriend excitedly, "It's indeed a divine item, a rare treasure. This is what I want." His girlfriend also flattered him and said with a smile, "That's right. Your taste is definitely right." At this time, Su Chan turned around and said with a malicious smile, "Give up. You can't get it." The smile on Rong Guoguo's face froze. "What do you mean by that?" Su Chan giggled and said, "Nothing. You couldn't buy the ivory tower just now, let alone this one." After that, she turned her face away again. Rong Guoguo was so angry that he roared in his heart, "The one just now was not what I really wanted to buy. Moreover, 80 million yuan for something with a base price of 100,000 yuan. Are you crazy? This is what I want to buy. Let's see if I can buy it later." Rong Guoguo was so angry that his face turned red, and his blood vessels bulged. Seeing this, his girlfriend whispered, "Mr. Rong, don't care about this little girl." Before she could finish her words, Rong Guoguo turned his head and roared at her in a low voice, "Shut up." The woman was shocked and didn't dare to speak again. Rong Guoguo stared at the Medicine King tripod with red eyes, as if he wanted to eat it in one bite. Not long after, the auctioneer began to announce the start of the bidding for the Medicine King tripod. The base price was 5 million yuan, and the lowest bid was 10,000 yuan. Rong Guoguo immediately raised the sign in his hand and shouted, 10 million. The first bid was doubled. The auctioneer was shocked. He excitedly pointed the hammer in the direction of Rong Guoguo and said loudly, "Someone offered 10 million yuan. Is there any higher bid than this?" Zhang Ling turned her head and glanced at Rong Guoguo. She sneered and raised the sign in her hand, 20 million. Wow, the second bid doubled again. The ordinary businessmen and buyers on the scene were dumbfounded. They had never seen such an auction. Li Yunyang and Su Chan looked at each other, and there was no longer the relaxed smile on their faces. Ziyuan said in a deep voice, "The real battle of Jinyuan has begun." Although Chris was born in a big family in the United States and often went to all kinds of high-class places, it was the first time she had seen such an auction where the price had doubled. She muttered in a low voice, "It's so fierce." Although Chen Wankai didn't know what the Medicine King tripod meant to cultivators, he was also keenly aware of the strange atmosphere on the scene. He frowned and quickly calculated in his heart. His eyes kept looking in the direction of Li Yunyang. Saionji Tsunekatsu, who was sitting not far from him, saw Rongguogua bid again and raised the price of the Medicine King tripod to 50 million yuan. He smiled coldly and said to Tuki, "It's ridiculous that the powerful magical weapon used by Sun Simiao, the king of medicine, is being bid at such a low price. Tuki, we can make our move now." Tuki nodded, raised the sign in his hand, and shouted in stiff Chinese, 51 million. As soon as he finished speaking, Saionji Tsunekatsu angrily scolded him in Japanese, "Bastard, don't you think you're losing face for our Jinyan tantrism by bidding like this?" After that, he grabbed the sign in Tuki's hand, raised it high, and shouted, 100 million. This is the first update on the 11th. Well. Chapter 612. Saionji Tsunekatsu's bid almost made Rongguo fall down. He looked at Saionji Tsunekatsu dumbfounded and said, "What is this Japanese doing? Is he crazy? Is there such a bid? This, no matter how valuable this thing is, it's not worth 100 million. Shen Yu and Shen Hui, who had followed Shen Wankai to watch the fun, were also shocked by Saionji Tsunekatsu's overbearing bid. Shen Hui whispered to her father, "Old man, this Japanese is so fierce. Is this Medicine King tripod worth so much money?" Shen Wankai narrowed his eyes and stared at Saionji Tsunekatsu. He said in a low voice, "I don't know if it's worth that much. Go to the internet." But what? Shen Hui asked curiously. Shen Wankai quickly glanced at Li Yundong and said calmly, "However, I will know in a moment whether this thing is worth that much money." Shen Wankai didn't expect that the price of this Medicine King tripod would soar to such a high level in an instant. The increase was so great that it was even more exaggerated than the price of a house. But for a scheming and calculating businessman like him, the most important thing now was to confirm the approximate value of this Medicine King tripod in Li Yundong's mind, and then calculate whether he should make a move or not. In the face of Saionji Tsunekatsu's crazy bid, the auction house instantly fell into a moment of dead silence. Obviously, Saionji Tsunekatsu's bid this time was like a heavy punch, heavily hitting the hearts of almost everyone on the scene, hitting their first psychological bottom line. Su Chan pulled Li Yundong's sleeve and said with a pale face, "Yundong, do we need to increase the price?" Li Yundong looked at Saionji Tsunekatsu as if he was facing a formidable enemy, and said with a heavy face, "I don't know, but I have a very bad feeling." After all, Zhou Qin was from a big family and was experienced and knowledgeable. As soon as she saw Saionji Tsunekatsu's posture, she whispered, "Not good, this guy seems to be determined to win. Master, what should we do?" Li Yundong quickly calculated in his mind. This time, they had raised 50 million yuan. According to Du Fei of the Chuanjin Dragon sect, they could mobilize about 90 million yuan to participate in the auction. Even if they calculated the repayment ability of the installments, the maximum amount of the two sides could not exceed 300 million yuan. Otherwise, their business would be in big trouble. However, the price had exceeded the 100 million mark in just a few bids. If it continued to grow at this rate, would he be able to compete with the Japanese? Even if he could bid for the Medicine King tripod at that time, if the bidding was too fierce, he would get into debt and think about how to get money to pay off the debt all day long. Then what was the point of cultivating? Even if the Medicine King tripod could be used for alchemy, the alchemy cycle would be too long. At that time, everyone in the Fox Zen school would definitely abandon their cultivation and be busy making money all day long. This was a matter of killing 10,000 enemies with 12,000 casualties. The losses outweighed the gains. What if the Japanese had such an idea? What could they do? Even if they didn't have this idea, the other sects would definitely be happy to see it happen. As the saying goes, it's better to cut off one finger than to injure all 10 fingers. Rather than fighting while bathed in blood, it was better to give up decisively so as to avoid sinking into the mud pit. However, was the Medicine King tripod going to be given up just like that? Seeing that Li Yundong was hesitant, Zi Yuan advised him softly, "Li Yundong, we haven't reached our bottom line yet. We can first test how determined the Japanese's attitude is." Li Yundong had been hesitant between insisting and giving up. At this time, when Zi Yuan said this, Li Yundong immediately had an idea. He nodded to Zi Yuan and quickly raised the sign. The auctioneer had expected that the Medicine King tripod would be sold at an amazing high price, and even many of the bidders in the auction house had ambushed them. However, what he hadn't expected was that as soon as the auction of the Medicine King tripod began, the atmosphere would become white-hot. He was so excited that his voice was a little out of shape. He shouted, 100 million going once. Is there any higher price than this? 100 million going twice. 130 million. Ah, someone offered 140 million. Is there a higher price than this? When the ordinary businessmen who had wanted to bid for the Medicine King tripod heard this price, there was an uproar. It was already very exaggerated as the previous price had soared from 50 million to 100 million. They didn't expect that there would be another price increase. Moreover, the price was raised to 140 million this time. It was too fierce. It was too bloody. When Du Fei heard Li Yundong's bid, his eyes involuntarily looked at him. When his eyes met Li Yundong's, he nodded slightly to him, showing a trace of appreciation in his eyes. Du Fei was both a cultivator and an experienced businessman. He naturally knew that Li Yundong's huge increase in the price in an instant was the best response to Saionji Tsunekatsu. The auction was like a narrow path that only allowed one person to walk. As the saying goes, the brave wins when they meet on a narrow road. Saionji Tsunekatsu raised the price fiercely. On the one hand, he showed his wealth and strength. On the other hand, he deterred every bidder who wanted to bid and showed his determination to win. And Li Yundong expressed a very tough attitude to Saionji Tsunekatsu with the same astonishing amount of increase, and this attitude was very likely to make the other party think, the opponent is also very rich, and this thing is also determined to be his. At this time, the other party would either be frightened by the other party's momentum like when playing haha, or meet on a narrow road. But at this time, what would Saionji Tsunekatsu do? Saionji Tsunekatsu glanced at Li Yundong and frowned slightly. He stared at Li Yundong like lightning without blinking, as if he wanted to see through Li Yundong's heart in an instant and see how many cards in his hand could support him. Li Yundong also looked at Saionji Tsunekatsu without showing any weakness. When their eyes met, the air seemed to spark. Although there was nothing unusual on Su Chan's face, her nervous hand tightly grasped Li Yundong's wide palm. Her body trembled slightly. She kept saying in her heart, "Don't raise the price, don't raise the price." As if he had heard Su Chan's prayer, Saionji Tsunekatsu was silent for a long time and did not speak again. At this time, the auctioneer on the stage also shouted, 140 million going once. Is there any higher price than this? 140 million. Twice. At this time, not only Su Chan, but also Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin, who had seen a lot of wind, couldn't help but be a little nervous. Their eyes were fixed on the gavel in the auctioneer's hand, and their ears were all pricked up, listening for anyone around to continue to raise the price. Just when the auctioneer shouted for the third time, suddenly, a hand was raised high in the front row, and a cold voice sounded, 200 million. There was another burst of exclamation on the scene. Li Yundong and the others immediately looked at this person. Zhang Ling. Li Yundong gritted his teeth fiercely and whispered, "Damn it. Is she starting to want strength?" This time, Zhang Ling's bid completely broke through the first psychological bottom line of everyone on the scene. It was like when a long-distance run reached its limit, the runner would often struggle painfully. Do you want to persist? But when they broke through this limit, they could often continue to run smoothly. And this time, Zhang Ling's bid completely made everyone on the scene understand in an instant, the Medicine King tripod would definitely be auctioned at a bloody price. If you didn't have the strength and psychological preparation, you'd better give up as soon as possible. In an instant, many cultivation sects and some ordinary businessmen who were interested in bidding chose to give up. They changed from participants to spectators in an instant. The price of 200 million had also greatly broken through the first psychological bottom line of Li Yundong and the others. Li Yundong couldn't help but look at Du Fei of the Chuanjin Dragon sect from a distance. Both of them saw a little fear in each other's eyes. Du Fei's eyes were full of hesitation and panic, and Li Yundong's eyes were also full of unwillingness and hesitation. The situation on the field had begun to show a trend out of their expectations and control, but they could do nothing about it. At this time, the auctioneer was also trembling with excitement, and his eyes were a little red. He knew that at the end of this auction, no matter what the result was, it would set a record for domestic auctions. Although there were few cases of works of art being auctioned in domestic auctions, people in the auction industry had boldly predicted that the era of art auctions that were often auctioned would soon come. But the auctioneer didn't expect that it would be so fast and that it would be born in his own hands. At this time, the villagers of Mount Huangshan, who were watching the auction backstage, had already fainted with excitement. He didn't expect that this thing he had seen casually could be auctioned at such a terrifying price. The auctioneer shouted in a hoarse voice, 200 million, is there any higher price than this? 200 million going once. At this time, very few people on the field were bidding, and Saionji Tsunekatsu and others were also hesitating. Although he had obtained the consent and support of Masako Tachibana before, if the price paid was too high, he would not be able to bear the consequences. But should he just give up like this? Saionji Tsunekatsu clenched his fists tightly. He gritted his teeth and shouted, 300 million. Wow! Almost everyone on the field was frightened by Saionji Tsunekatsu's madness. Even the auctioneer's heart almost beat too fast for a moment, and he fainted on the spot. Throughout the world's auction history, no one had ever raised the price by such a huge margin. This Saionji Tsunekatsu was either crazy or determined to get the Medicine King tripod. At this time, Li Yundong and Zhang Ling were frightened by the madness of Saionji Tsunekatsu. Although Jingyi School was the largest sect in the cultivation world, it almost didn't have its own large enterprises. A large part of their money depended on incense donations. It could also be said that this was consuming the savings and resources of Jingyi School. If they fought too fiercely this time, it would hurt their muscles and bones. Cultivation was the most expensive thing in this world. Dharma, money, companions, and earthly treasures. How could one cultivate without money? What's more, how could they support such a large sect? Zhang Ling looked at Saionji Tsunekatsu in shock. She knew that if they really competed with Zhenyan Tantrism in terms of money, Jingyi School would definitely not win. The only one in the Chinese cultivation world that could compete with them was probably the Gazao sect of external alchemy. After all, the accumulation of Zhenyan Tantrism for thousands of years was too deep, especially in Japan, where the control of the cultivation world was relatively loose. It could even be said that the Japanese cultivation world had penetrated deeply into this country. The political world of this country could be infiltrated and controlled by the forces of the underworld, let alone the cultivation world. Once the power of the cultivation world was combined with the power of the country, the great power produced was unimaginable by ordinary people. This Saionji Tsunekatsu. Is he really here to rob the Medicine King tripod on behalf of Zhenyan Tantrism? Zhang Ling stared at Saionji Tsunekatsu and thought quickly, isn't he afraid that the cultivation world of China and Japan will become enemies? Or is he just scaring me? Zhou Ping gritted her teeth and said to Zhang Ling, Master, why don't we just fight with the Japanese? Zhang Ling's face was extremely ugly. She was hesitant for a moment, but the auctioneer on the stage would not wait for her. He shouted hysterically 3 times in a row. When the hammer was about to fall, Zhang Kongyun suddenly raised the sign in his hand and shouted, 350 million. Wow! Everyone was horrified. At this time, most of the people on the scene had already given up. They just looked at the scene curiously. What kind of terrible price can this Medicine King tripod sell for? When Zhang Ling heard Zhang Kongyun's bid, she suddenly turned her head, stared at him, and whispered, Shirdi, this is all the money we can use. Zhang Kongyun laughed and said lightly, I know. Anyway, there are only so many trump cards. It's better to push them all out at once. Zhang Ling turned her head and glared at Ronghua with a face full of unwillingness. She thought bitterly in her heart, if it weren't for this bastard spending 80 million in advance. Humph. Many times, bidding is like riding a tiger. The later it is, the more dangerous it is. Moreover, the later it is, the more difficult it is to ride a tiger. No one is willing to admit defeat easily. Often, bidders are gambling and fighting for a bit of face. As the saying goes, people fight for a breath, and Buddha fights for a stick of incense. But no matter what, in the face of the astonishing high price of 350 million, Saionji Tsunekatsu could not calm down at this time. The body of Rigoino Tsunekatsu was trembling slightly, and Tuki, who was beside him, was pale and kept swallowing. Tuki whispered to Saionji Tsunekatsu, Lord Changsheng, you can't increase it anymore. If you increase it again, Masako Tachibana will be angry. Saionji Tsunekatsu gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, if you can't complete her task, it will not be as simple as being angry. Saionji Tsunekatsu made up his mind and shouted resolutely, 400 million. The entire arena nearly exploded. Saionji Tsunekatsu called a price 3 times in total. The first time was 100 million, the second time was 300 million, and the third time was 400 million. Such an amazing increase in price was unprecedented and frightening. Zhang Ling was instantly overwhelmed by the absolute momentum of Saionji Tsunekatsu. It was as if a sword had pierced through her heart. Her face was pale, and for a moment, she was stunned and speechless. Zhang Kongyun couldn't help shaking his head and sighing, his face full of helplessness and regret. Su Chan pinched Li Yundong's hand in horror and whispered, Yundong, it's already 400 million. This. What should we do? Li Yundong sighed and said painfully, don't think about it. Things have completely exceeded our expectations. This is not a price we can afford. We are out. Although they had expected such a situation, the faces of Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and the others were all gloomy and ugly. Ao Wushuang also sighed and shook her head. This is God's will. There's nothing we can do. Su Chan was shocked and said, will the Medicine King tripod be taken away by the Japanese like this? Li Yundong watched the auctioneer on the stage repeat the current price again and again. He fixed his eyes on the auctioneer's hammer falling little by little. But just as the hammer was about to be finalized, someone on the field suddenly raised a hand. The auctioneer's hammer instantly stopped in midair. He shouted excitedly in a hoarse voice, someone has bid a higher price. 410 million, is there a higher price than this? Everyone on the field had thought that 400 million would be the final price, but they didn't expect that someone would raise the price again at this time. Who was this person? Why did he go crazy with Saionji Tsunekatsu? This auction had completely turned into a hand-to-hand fight between madmen. The battle of gold yuan on the field had reached its climax, and the air was filled with a terrible smell of blood. For a moment, everyone's eyes turned to look at this person. Chapter 613. Everyone looked at the person who raised the sign, only to see that this person looked ordinary. He was an old man in his 60s. This old man was wearing a bright yellow long gown and a hand-sewn fur waistcoat. Compared to the rich businessmen around him who were dressed in suits and leather shoes, he was really not eye-catching. Go to CNET. 7 KOM. Book_bar_first. In addition to the previous bidding, the old man had never raised his paddle from beginning to end, but no one had expected that the one who had gone crazy with Saionji Tsunekatsu was the guy who had never raised his paddle from beginning to end at the auction. Li Yundong suddenly looked over and was stunned. He couldn't believe his eyes and said in surprise, "Why did Mr. Shin make a move?" Zhou Qin said with both surprise and excitement, "Great, Mr. Shin made a move. I was scared to death. I thought the Medicine King tripod was going to be bought by the Japanese." Su Chan's eyes widened and she looked at Shin Wankai in astonishment. She asked Li Yundong in a low voice, "Yundong, is Mr. Shin so rich?" 400 million yuan. Not 40,000 yuan. Before Li Yundong could speak, Zhou Qin laughed and said, "Su Chan, don't underestimate Shin Wankai. He is a real rich man, but he is relatively low-key, so he is not famous. You see, when he met the mayor at the opening ceremony of Desanxian, he didn't even bother to get close to him. He just greeted the secretary of the provincial party committee. Just from this style, you can see how powerful he is." Su Chan stuck out her tongue and said, "So powerful? I underestimated him. I thought he was just an ordinary rich man." Zhou Qin laughed and said, "There are many rich people in China now, and there are as many hidden rich families as there are hairs on an ox. Shin Wankai is one of them. My father used to comment on him to me. He said that he was a decisive and astute person who never fought an unprepared battle. As long as he made a move, he must be fully prepared." She stared at Shin Wankai for a while and then looked at him. Her deep and dark eyes seemed to see through people's hearts and the world in an instant. She vaguely touched something. A smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, but she didn't say anything. At this time, all his attention was focused on Shin Wankai and Saionji Tsunekatsu. Although he had become a spectator like most of the people here, watching the Medicine King tripod fall into Shin Wankai's hands was much better than watching Sun Simiao's Taoist supreme magical weapon fall into the hands of the Japanese. Saionji Tsunekatsu did not expect that after he finally defeated Zhang Ling, a bad old man would appear out of nowhere. This was like a blood-soaked warrior who had broken through the encirclement and thought that he had become the final winner. Suddenly, a new force appeared, giving Saionji Tsunekatsu a great psychological blow and a blow to his morale. Saionji Tsunekatsu stared at Shin Wankai fiercely, as if he wanted to swallow the old man who had come out of nowhere. Tuki said in a trembling voice, "Tsunekatsu, what should we do?" "Give up." Saionji Tsunekatsu was trembling all over. He stared at Shin Wankai unwillingly. His sharp eyes were like a sharp blade, as if he wanted to split Shin Wankai apart so that he could see through his true inner thoughts. Shin Wankai was indeed a person who was used to seeing great storms. He didn't even look at Saionji Tsunekatsu. He looked straight ahead with a faint smile on his face, as if he was looking down on everyone. Shin Yu and Shin Hui, who were beside him, were also shocked by Shin Wankai's sudden action. After a long time, Shin Hui said, "Old man, are you okay? 400 million. 400 million to buy such a thing?" Shin Yu was also shocked. "Dad, are you crazy?" Shin Wankai looked at them with great displeasure and shouted in a low voice, "Shut up. What do you know?" Saionji Tsunekatsu saw that both Shin Yu and Shin Hui were questioning Shin Wankai. He thought to himself, "Is this old guy bluffing? In fact, he has also reached his limit." Saionji Tsunekatsu quickly calculated in his heart, "Although Masako Tachibana didn't set a bottom line for me, as far as I know, the bottom line in her mind should be about 500 million, but if it exceeds 400 million, she will definitely be angry. The current price is 410 million, which will already make Masako Tachibana very angry, but, if it costs 500 million to complete the task, it is not unacceptable. Saionji Tsunekatsu hesitated, and almost everyone on the scene saw the clue. Zhou Qin whispered in Li Jiandong's ear, "This Japanese is a little scared. Now the price should be closer to the limit he can bear, so he can no longer raise the price unscrupulously. In a moment, when we see what price he offers, we should guess his bottom line." Saionji Tsunekatsu thought for a moment. When he saw that the hammer in the auctioneer's hand was about to fall, he suddenly showed a grim smile, raised the sign, and shouted, 500 million. F***CK. Almost half of the people on the scene stood up and looked at Saionji Tsunekatsu in astonishment. Tuki was so frightened by Saionji Tsunekatsu's action that he almost fell off his seat. He looked at Saionji Tsunekatsu with a pale face, and his lips trembled slightly. He shouted in his heart, "Tsunekatsu is crazy, he must be crazy. When we go back, we will be locked in the ghost prison by Masako Tachibana. It must be. No, I must stop him." Tuki was about to speak, but he saw that although Saionji Tsunekatsu's face was full of a desperate ferocious smile, his hands hidden behind his back were trembling slightly. Seeing this scene, Tuki swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue. Zhou Qin was also shocked and speechless. She couldn't speak for a long time. At this time, Li Jiandong laughed and whispered, "As the saying goes, fighting is like using troops, and the business world is like a battlefield. This Japanese guy is good at psychological warfare." "I know what you just said. But even I know it, how can he not know it? So, he simply unsheathed his sword and fought with you to the death." At this time, everyone on the scene was seriously shaken by their previous judgment. Has this little Japanese guy not reached the bottom line at all? Or is he bluffing now? At this time, Li Jiandong had completely let go of the obsession of competing for the Medicine King tripod, jumped out of this circle of interests, and looked at this fierce battle from the perspective of a third party. He recalled the situation of all parties bidding at the auction before, and he seemed to understand something. He couldn't help but whisper, "There is a saying in the art of war that the false is the real, and the real is the false. I think that now this little Japanese is really at the end of his rope." Su Chan asked in confusion, "Yundong, what do you mean? Why do I feel that this Japanese guy seems to have a lot of money?" "You see, he increased the price by nearly 100 million yuan again. It's scary," Li Jiandong said with a smile. Before, Saionji Tsunekatsu raised the price several times in order to scare off his competitors, especially his opponents who raised the price by a lot. But Shen Wankai is different. He was the last one to appear, and the increase was much smaller than in the previous rounds. If Saionji Tsunekatsu really has the confidence, he can follow Shen Wansai's example and increase the price by 10 million yuan, and then grind with his opponent all the way to see who can grind to death. Hey, but this Saionji Tsunekatsu knows very well that cutting flesh with a blunt knife is the most painful, so he decided to break his wrist. It's better to break one finger than to hurt 10 fingers. Therefore, the purpose of his fourth large increase in price is to completely defeat his opponent with the momentum of a tiger that can swallow thousands of miles. At this time, Zhou Qin couldn't help but look at Li Jiandong with admiration and said with a smile, "Master, you are right. If you go to do business, you will definitely be successful." If Saionji Tsunekatsu's move was used on a newcomer, it was very likely to have an effect. But Shen Wankai is different. He is an old fox who has been in the business world for a lifetime. How could he fall into such a trap? As if to confirm Zhou Qin's words, Shen Wansai's expression remained unchanged. He slowly raised the sign in his hand and once again increased the price by 10 million yuan. The price of the Medicine King tripod had become a terrifying 510 million yuan. At this time, Saionji Tsunekatsu's face couldn't help but change dramatically. At this time, he also suddenly came to his senses. He knew that his opponent was a very cunning old fox. Not only was he cunning, but he was also experienced. This move of his was useless against the opponent. But at this time, he had already called the limit price. What should he do? Saionji Tsunekatsu's whole body trembled uncontrollably. He gritted his teeth. When the auctioneer repeated the price again and again, he suddenly roared, 520 million yuan. At this time, there was another burst of sigh. Unlike the previous sigh, at this time, everyone heard Saionji Tsunekatsu's fierce appearance but weak heart. They all noticed that the Japanese was on the verge of collapse. At this time, the eyes of the audience involuntarily turned to Shen Wankai, wondering in their hearts, is this old man also on the verge of collapse? Is he just not showing it? Although the increase of the price had been reduced at this time, the atmosphere on the scene became more and more tense. Su Chan held Li Yundong's hand tightly and whispered nervously, Yundong, this Japanese also raised the price slightly. Is he going to fight a war of attrition with Mr. Shen? Li Yundong smiled and said, it should be like this. However, I don't know where Mr. Shen's bottom line is, so I don't know who will win if the two of them continue to consume each other. But in terms of momentum and psychological advantage, Mr. Shen has already taken the advantage. As soon as Li Yundong's voice fell, Shen Wankai slowly raised the sign and raised the price by 10 million yuan again. At this time, Saionji Tsunekatsu was completely like a red-eyed gambler. He immediately roared, 540 million yuan. Shen Wankai was not in a hurry to bid immediately. He waited until the auctioneer called for the third time before he slowly raised the sign again. 550 million yuan. Saionji Tsunekatsu immediately roared again, 560 million yuan. After a while, Shen Wankai raised the sign again and said, 570 million yuan. The two of them raised the price back and forth like a barrage of cannons. Although the range was not as terrifying as before, such a blunt knife cutting flesh was really torturous. The price was approaching the 600 million yuan mark. The price of 600 million yuan meant that it was also an astonishing price in the international market, not to mention in the domestic market. At this time, everyone on the scene held their breath and did not dare to breathe more. Besides Saionji Tsunekatsu, Tuki trembled and grabbed Saionji Tsunekatsu's arm. He couldn't help but shout in Japanese, Mr. Tsunekatsu, you can't increase it anymore. You really can't increase it anymore. Saionji Tsunekatsu turned his head and roared in Japanese with a ferocious face, bastard, shut up. After that, his face twisted like a devil and he roared, 600 million yuan. Everyone present took a deep breath and looked at Shen Wankai in unison. Li Yundong's expression was also a little solemn. He said in a low voice, this should be the last desperate attack of the Japanese. Zi Yuan shook her head and said, not necessarily. The Japanese are famous for their tenacity. Their ability to resist pressure and tenacity can be called the first in the world. If Shen Wankai still follows the price of 10 million yuan, maybe it will continue to be consumed. Li Yundong nodded and said, what you said makes sense. Let's see how Mr. Shen will bid. But at this time, Shen Wankai turned his face for the first time and looked at his opponent who was fighting with him on the battlefield. He frowned and pondered, not speaking for a while. The auctioneer on the auction stage saw that Shen Wankai had not spoken for a long time. After he kept repeating the price, he also thought that 600 million yuan should be the final price. After he quickly repeated it for the third time, he breathed a sigh of relief and raised the gavel in his hand high. At this time, Saionji Tsunekatsu also seemed to collapse. He showed a smile of victory in a battle to the death and laughed proudly. Ah! Mr. Shen gave up. Su Chan saw the gavel fall little by little, and she cried out in surprise. But at this critical moment, Shen Wankai suddenly smiled. He raised the sign in his hand and slowly said, 700 million. Chapter 6:14. Just when Saionji Tsunekatsu thought he had won, Shen Wankai suddenly made the most fatal blow. Go to the net. 7 K.O.M. At this moment, Lee suddenly remembered the Pacific War between the United States and Japan from Pearl Island to Midway Island during World War II. Although all the discerning people knew that Japan would be defeated at the beginning, Japan had been retreating all the way from Midway Island, but they had been resisting all the way, like cornered beasts fighting, and launched a fierce bloody battle. Even the Emperor of Japan and the crazy army headquarters were ready to mobilize the whole country to fight the landing of the Americans, but at this time, the Americans knew that they would suffer heavy losses if they landed in Japan, so they gave the Japanese the most terrible blow: atomic bombing. Although the number of people killed by the 2 atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was far less than the number of Japanese soldiers killed on the battlefield, when the Japanese were ready to fight the final war of attrition with the other side, the Americans suddenly gave them the most unimaginable blow. As the saying goes, the market is the battlefield, and fighting is like using troops. Shin Wankai had been fighting hand-to-hand with Saionji Tsunekatsu, but at the last moment, when Saionji Tsunekatsu thought he had won, he suddenly threw the atomic bomb. This sudden huge increase in price finally broke the will of Saionji Tsunekatsu and completely destroyed his idea of winning. 700 million. This was an auction price that could shock the world. Wow! Almost everyone on the scene exclaimed. Saionji Tsunekatsu's laughter suddenly stopped. It was as if someone had hollowed out his chest. His body shook, his face became pale, and he stayed where he was as if he had lost his soul. The auctioneer was also stimulated by this price and almost had a heart attack again. He shouted in a hoarse voice, 700 million. Is there a higher price than this? 700 million once. 700 million twice. 700 million thrice. Sold. The mallet finally landed heavily. Everyone let out a long sigh of relief. They couldn't help but shake their heads and sigh with emotion. My God, 700 million. What kind of concept was this? It was about to refresh the world auction price. The auctioneer's face was flushed, and his heart was thumping wildly. He knew that no matter what the outcome was, their Tian Ai auction house would become famous throughout the world. Shen Hui and Shen Yu sat beside Shen Wankai in a daze. They stared blankly at their father without any joy of victory. Instead, they looked at Shen Wankai with an inexplicable blank gaze, as if they didn't know this person at all. Saionji Tsunekatsu stood there like a dead man. Tuki, who was beside him, looked as if he had lost his parents. He smiled bitterly and said to Saionji Tsunekatsu, Mr. Tsunekatsu, we failed. Forget it, let's go back. Saionji Tsunekatsu didn't seem to hear it. His eyes were fixed on Shen Wankai. In his eyes, after Shen Wankai succeeded in the auction, he did not have a sense of victory and joy. Instead, he frowned slightly, as if there was something unhappy. Saionji Tsunekatsu couldn't help but think, is he also close to his limit? Or, if he persisted a little longer, would he give up? Thinking of this, Saionji Tsunekatsu could not help but grit his teeth and walked toward Shen Wankai. When Tuki saw this, he quickly grabbed him and whispered in Japanese, Mr. Tsunekatsu, calm down. What are you going to do? Saionji Tsunekatsu didn't even look at him. He pushed him away and walked straight to Shen Wankai, staring at him with gloomy and terrifying eyes. Seeing this, Shin Yu stood up and shouted, What do you want? Saionji Tsunekatsu turned his head and glared at him. Shin Yu suddenly felt as if his heart had been stabbed by a knife. He fell into his seat and trembled all over. Shen Hui stood up at this time and said angrily, Do you want to hit someone after losing? At this time, Li Yundong and the others also came over. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, Saionji Tsunekatsu, look at where you are standing under your feet. This is China. Not Japan. After he finished speaking, Du Fei of the Chuanjin Dragon sect also stood up with a smile. Sun Wei Qing, who was beside him, also stood up and stared at him unkindly. Then, the cultivators of all the sects on the field all stood up with a common enemy and stared at Saionji Tsunekatsu. The fierceness on Saionji Tsunekatsu's face suddenly dissipated a lot. He took a deep breath, bowed respectfully to Shen Wankai, and said, "Would like to ask your name." Shen Wankai nodded gratefully to Li Yundong and the others. He smiled slightly and said, "Shen Wankai." Saionji Tsunekatsu looked respectful and said, "Shen Jun. May I ask why you have to compete with me for this Medicine King tripod?" Shen Wankai smiled slightly and said, "Because anyone can take this Medicine King tripod, but you Japanese can't." This sentence immediately caused the whole audience to cheer loudly. For a time, the applause on the field was like thunder, and there were bursts of cheers. At this time, Saionji Tsunekatsu bent down, and a fierce look flashed in his eyes. But when he raised his body, his face was humble. He said, "So that's how it is. Congratulations on getting this Medicine King tripod." At this time, Li Yundong also whispered to Su Chan, "I haven't seen it yet. This Mr. Shen is very patriotic. Is he also a nationalistic youth?" Su Chan pursed her lips and said with a smile, "He is not young." Li Yundong laughed and said, "He has a young heart. He is a young man." Zi Yuan, who was at the side, heard their conversation and smiled slightly. She gave Shen Wankai a meaningful look and smiled without saying a word. At this time, Rongguofa was quite gloating. Although he didn't bid for this Medicine King tripod, what made him happy was that Li Yundong didn't get it either. "It doesn't matter if I don't live well, but I'm happy to see that you don't live well either." Rongguofa was in such a state of mind at this time. Rongguofa hugged his girlfriend and said with a smile, "Do you see? Mr. Shen is the real rich man. What is momentum? What is domineering? He's different from some young nouveau riche." Hearing his words, Su Chan turned her face unhappily and said, "What are you talking about?" Rongguofa raised his head and laughed. "I didn't say anything. It's just that I heard some people boast before, but now they return empty-handed. At least I bought an ivory Arhat tower. It's much better than some people empty-handed, isn't it?" Su Chan was furious. Just as she was about to quarrel with him, Li Yundong stopped her and said to her with a smile, "Chaner, don't tell him. It's meaningless." Seeing that Li Yundong had backed down, Rongguofa thought that he was afraid to fight. He suddenly felt a sense of exaltation. He sneered and said, "Young man, learn more. You are still young." Li Yundong smiled slightly and didn't say anything. Seeing that Li Yundong had backed down again, Rongguofa was quite unforgiving. He wanted to continue to taunt him, but he saw Shen Wankai walking straight over at this time. He immediately greeted him with a smile and stretched out his hands. "Old Shen, you have fought for our Chinese people today." Shen Wankai saw him at a glance and shook hands with him with a smile. He smiled noncommittally and said, "Don't mention it. It's just a child's game." Rongguofa flattered with a smile on his face, "Mr. Shen is so domineering. You actually regard the astronomical price of 700 million as a child's game. Amazing. No wonder you are the overlord of the South." As he spoke, he turned his head again and glanced at Li Yundong intentionally or unintentionally with a sarcastic smile on his face. Seeing this, Su Chan was so angry that her cheeks puffed up. Just as she was about to lose her temper, she saw Shen Wankai nodding to her with a smile. "Miss Su Chan, we meet again." Su Chan had to swallow the words that rushed to her mouth. She stretched out her hand gracefully and shook hands with Shen Wankai, saying, "Mr. Shen, congratulations." Shen Wankai smiled slightly. He turned his face to look at Li Yundong and said, "Childly, I have a presumptuous request. Please agree." Before Li Yundong could speak, Rongguofa was stunned for a moment. He looked at Li Yundong incredulously and thought to himself, "Who on earth is this guy? Why is Mr. Shen so polite to him?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "Mr. Shen, just say it. Just because of what you said just now, I will also." Before Li Yundong could finish his words, he heard Zi Yuan whispering to him in private, "Li Yundong, don't be in a hurry to agree to him." Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, but he changed his words and said, "Just because of what you said just now, I will also think about it." Shen Wankai didn't doubt him and laughed. He turned around and walked to the auction platform. After saying a few words in private with the auctioneer suddenly looked shocked and asked Shen Wankai carefully several times in disbelief. It was not until Shen Wankai was a little impatient that he picked up the microphone, coughed dryly, and said to everyone present, "Ladies and gentlemen, now I want to announce something amazing. Mr. Shen Wankai, who has just bid for the Medicine King tripod at a sky-high price of 700 million yuan, has decided to give such a sky-high treasure to Mr. Li Yundong. Let's witness all of this together." As soon as the auctioneer's voice fell, there was an uproar. Almost everyone in the cultivation sects was stunned. What? Zhang Ling could hardly believe her ears. 700 million yuan. Just like that? Zhou Ping was tongue-tied and dumbfounded. Li Yundong himself was also stunned, but he quickly reacted and looked at Zi Yuan. When their eyes met, Zi Yuan nodded slightly to him. Li Yundong immediately sneered and thought to himself, "This Shen Wankai is really good at playing tricks. I told him before that spending a lot of money is good for cultivation, and now he has done such a thing. I have no choice but to accept him as a disciple. Hey, what a good trick." Su Chan and Zhou Qin were not fools. They quickly reacted and looked at Li Yundong with worry in their eyes. They all knew Li Yundong's character very well. He could be persuaded but not cowed. He was frank and straightforward in his words and deeds. He liked to be straightforward and didn't like to beat around the bush. Shen Wansai's way of beating around the bush was not small. Although it could be said that he had put in a lot of effort, it just happened to violate Li Yundong's taboo. If he wanted to take credit for this matter and wanted to be apprenticed, then Shen Wankai would have made a wrong calculation. Rong Guofa didn't know about the twists and turns. He stared at Li Yundong as if he had seen an alien and stammered, "Who are you?" Hearing his words, Su Chan turned her head and said very seriously, "Don't you remember what I once said to you? Remember, his name is Li Yundong. I once said that in less than 2 years, he would definitely become a famous figure in the world. And you will never be able to compare with him." After that, Su Chan snorted and turned her face away, her face full of pride. At this time, Tuki, who was not far away, whispered to Sionji Tsunekatsu, "Changsheng, what should we do now? This Medicine King tripod has fallen into the hands of Li Yundong." Sionji Tsunekatsu turned his face and stared at Shen Wankai, who was holding the Medicine King tripod with both hands and calmly taking pictures in front of the cameras of the media. He sneered and said, "Since we can't bid for it, it seems that this matter can't be good. We can only use force. Tuki, get ready. I'm going to steal the Medicine King tripod under the eyes of the Chinese cultivators." You're tuning in to the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.